The vault beneath the Montana cabin held secrets worth $265 million. But on the morning Thomas Bennett died, only he knew they existed. The old man sat at his oak desk 12 feet underground, surrounded by paintings that museums would kill for and stock certificates that had multiplied 1,000-fold over 4 decades. His hands, steady despite 89 years of use, adjusted the VHS camera one final time. "My name is Thomas James Bennett." He spoke directly into the lens, his voice carrying the gravel of age and the certainty of a man who had looked death in the face more than once. "Today is May 15th, 2018. I am of sound mind and body, as will be attested by my doctor and attorney. If you are watching this, the wolves have arrived." He paused, studying his reflection in the camera's glass eye. The face looking back had been carved by weather and time and memories that never quite faded. Vietnam had put the first lines there, deep gouges around eyes that had seen too much. Montana had added the rest, softer marks from squinting at mountains and balance sheets, and the slow passage of seasons that healed nothing but taught you how to carry the weight. "I am recording this because I know what is coming." Tom's fingers drummed once against the desktop, a rare tell of emotion breaking through decades of practiced stillness. "I have observed Emma Walsh's siblings for years now. Watched them at weddings and funerals, and all those obligatory gatherings families convince themselves matter. I have seen their character, or the complete absence of it. They will take every dollar she has. They will abandon her when the money runs out. And when they learn about this inheritance, they will return with lawyers and lies and a sense of entitlement that would be comical if it were not so vicious." The camera continued recording. Tom laid out his predictions with the precision of a man who had spent his life reading patterns in numbers and human behavior. He spoke of guardianship petitions and competency hearings and the specific cruelties he knew were coming. He spoke of Emma, the niece he had never really known, but had watched from a careful distance for 30 years. And he spoke of character, that word he returned to again and again like a soldier checking his weapon before battle. "This collection represents my life's work. 37 years of patience and faith that beauty and value are worth preserving. I leave it to Emma Walsh because she understands what truly matters. Not wealth, but character. Not taking, but giving." When he finally reached forward to stop recording, the light in the vault seemed to dim, as if the room itself understood this was the last time Thomas Bennett would speak his truth into the world. He died that night in his sleep, peacefully, in the cabin he had built with his own hands in 1957. No pain, no struggle, just the gentle cessation of a heartbeat that had kept time through a war and 4 decades of solitude. The mountains stood watch as they always had, patient and eternal, keeping secrets that would not surface for another 6 months. 6 months and 2,000 miles away, Emma Walsh woke to condensation on the inside of a Honda Civic's windows, and the particular shame that comes from being 38 years old and homeless. November in Tacoma brought the kind of cold that seeped through metal and cloth and skin, settling into bones that were already tired from 2 years of parking lot nights. Beside her in the back seat, Sophie stirred, 9 years old with tangled brown hair, and a stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest like a talisman against the world's indifference. The rabbit's name was Mr. Hoppers, and Sophie had owned him since she was 3, back when they still lived in an apartment with heat and running water and a refrigerator that actually worked. Back when Emma had been a nurse with a steady paycheck and something resembling dignity. Back before her ex-husband's fists had forced them to flee in the middle of the night. Before her father had died of cancer that moved too fast for treatment. Before her siblings had stolen $87,000 in insurance money and disappeared like smoke. Sophie sat up carefully, trying not to wake her mother, and pulled her notebook from the backpack that served as her pillow. The pages were filled with houses, always houses, drawn in colored pencil, with the meticulous attention of a child who understood that home was not a given, but a dream that might never materialize. She had numbered them, these imaginary sanctuaries. This morning's sketch would be number 247. Emma pretended to sleep a few moments longer, watching through barely opened eyes as her daughter drew windows with curtains and a chimney with smoke curling upward. The guilt that accompanied these observations had become so familiar, it felt like a vital organ, something she could not live without, even though it was slowly killing her. 9 years old, and Sophie had learned to lie to her classmates about why she could not have friends over. 9 years old, and she ranked their various states of homelessness by severity, as if poverty were a sport with standings and statistics. The Walmart parking lot came to life around them with the pre-dawn shift change. Delivery trucks backing up to loading docks, early workers arriving in vehicles that started on the first try, the world moving forward while Emma and Sophie remained frozen in place. Emma heated water in a camping kettle plugged into the car's cigarette lighter, a small luxury that drained the battery but provided hot water for instant coffee and basic hygiene. Baby wipes for their faces and hands. Sophie changing into school clothes in the cramped back seat while Emma held up a towel for privacy, as if the threadbare cloth could shield her daughter from the reality that this parking lot was their bedroom, their bathroom, their entire world condensed into 160 cubic feet of space. They split a granola bar for breakfast. Sophie got the bigger piece, though she did not know it. Emma had become expert at making inequity look like fairness, at pretending she was not hungry when her stomach cramped with emptiness. The coffee was weak, barely brown, but at least it was hot. Small mercies counted for everything when you had nothing else to count. The school bus stop was 3 blocks away, close enough that Emma could walk Sophie there and still make it back to the library before it opened at 9. The library was the only place Emma could use computers to send out job applications that disappeared into the void of an economy that had no use for nurses who could not provide a stable home address. 47 applications this month alone. 17 interviews that had gone well until the inevitable question about her current living situation, forcing her to choose between lies that would unravel or truth that disqualified her immediately. Lily shouldered her worn backpack, the zipper broken on one side and held together with a safety pin that caught the morning light. She looked up at her mother with those serious, dark eyes that seemed too old for a 9-year-old face, eyes that had seen too much and understood more than any child should have to understand. "Mom," Jessica asked if she could come over to our house after school. The words hit Emma like a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs. She knelt down on the sidewalk, her scrubs from her last nursing job 2 years ago threadbare at the knees, and met her daughter's gaze at eye level. "Oh, sweetie, what did you tell her?" Sophie's voice stayed steady, matter of fact, a child who had learned to lie to protect her mother's pride. "I told her we were moving soon, that our house is all packed up in boxes. I said maybe after we get settled in the new place." Emma pulled her daughter into a hug that threatened to break her, this fierce, loyal girl who deserved so much better than parking lot mornings and granola bar breakfasts, and the particular violence of poverty that ground you down so slowly you barely noticed until there was nothing left. "Baby, I am so sorry. This is not forever. I am going to fix this." "I know, Mom." Sophie hugged her back, small arms strong with a faith Emma did not deserve. "We have had worse, right? Remember when the car broke down in Portland and we had to sleep in the bus station?" They had indeed had worse, though the fact that a 9-year-old could rank their various states of homelessness made Emma want to scream into the gray November sky until her voice gave out. She walked Sophie to the bus stop, watched her climb aboard with other children who had homes to go to and lunches packed in proper lunch boxes, and parents who were not one car breakdown away from complete disaster. Then she walked back to the Honda, sat in the driver's seat, and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to cry before she had to pull herself together and face another day of trying to claw their way back to stability. The library did not open for another hour, so Emma drove to St. Catherine's Women's Shelter on the east side, the same shelter where she had fled 10 years ago, with infant Sophie in her arms, running from an ex-husband whose fists came out when he drank, which was every night. Sister Agnes still ran the place, 70 years old now, but still sharp, still kind, still willing to let Emma use the shelter's address for mail, since a post office box cost money they did not have, and no employer wanted to send correspondence to a Walmart parking lot. The morning was cold enough that Emma's breath plumed white as she walked up the steps past women she recognized from the rotation of desperation that kept cycling people through this place. Some had been here when Emma had been here a decade ago, still stuck, still fighting, still losing the same battle against circumstances that gave no quarter and took no prisoners. Sister Agnes looked up from the intake desk and smiled, the lines around her eyes deepening with genuine warmth. "Sarah, good morning. There is a letter for you. Came yesterday. Looks official." The envelope was cream-colored, thick paper stock that felt expensive between Emma's fingers. The kind of envelope that came from law firms or collection agencies. The kind that usually brought bad news wrapped in professional letterhead. It was addressed in elegant script to Emma Walsh, care of St. Catherine's Shelter, Tacoma, Washington. The return address read Chen and Associates, Attorneys at Law, Helena, Montana. Her first thought was that someone was suing her, that somehow she owed money she did not know about, that the situation that could not possibly get worse was about to prove her wrong. She opened it standing right there in the shelter lobby, Sister Agnes pretending to be busy with paperwork, but clearly curious, and began to read. Dear Miss Walsh, we are writing to inform you that you have been named as the sole beneficiary in the estate of Thomas James Bennett, your late great-uncle. Mr. Bennett passed away 6 months ago at the age of 89. His estate has been finalized and per his explicit instructions, his property located in Jefferson County, Montana is to be transferred to you and your daughter upon completion of all legal requirements. Emma's hands started to shake before the words actually penetrated. She read the paragraph again, then a third time, trying to make sense of syllables that seemed to rearrange themselves every time she looked away. The property consists of a log cabin structure on 43 acres of forested land with mountain access. There are no outstanding debts, liens, or encumbrances of any kind. The property is free and clear. Mr. Bennett also left a fund to cover your travel expenses should you wish to inspect the property before making any decisions regarding its future. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to arrange transfer of the deed and discuss next steps. Enclosed was a check for $1,500 made out to Emma Walsh. She stared at it like it might disappear if she looked away. More money than she had possessed at one time in 2 years. Travel expenses, the letter said, as if the idea of traveling anywhere was not itself a fantasy she had stopped allowing herself. Thomas Bennett. Emma tried to place the name, digging through memories of family gatherings she had mostly tried to forget. A vague impression surfaced of an older man at her father's funeral 18 months ago, standing in the back of the church, not speaking to anyone. Tall, weathered, with eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. Her father had mentioned him once or twice. Uncle Tom went west after Vietnam, never came back, bought land in Montana and disappeared. We have not heard from him in decades. Sarah? Sister Agnes's voice pulled her back to the present. Is everything all right? My great-uncle died. Emma's voice sounded strange in her own ears, distant and dreamlike. He left me property, a cabin in Montana. I do not even remember him. Sister Agnes came around the desk and read over her shoulder, her hand coming to rest on Emma's arm with the kind of touch that anchored you when the world started spinning too fast. This is from God, child. This is your chance. Emma wanted to believe that, wanted to let hope in past the scar tissue that 2 years of homelessness had built around her heart. But she had learned that hope was dangerous when you were barely surviving. It could be nothing, a shack with no plumbing, a trailer falling apart in the woods, a burden that would cost more to maintain than it was worth. Or it could be a home, a real home, a place where Sophie could have her own room and Emma could stop lying about why they could not have friends over. Sister Agnes squeezed her arm. You will not know unless you go. The thought formed slowly, taking shape against all her instincts toward caution and self-protection. Montana, 43 acres, a cabin that might be worthless or might be salvation. The check in her hand represented an opportunity she had not had in so long she had almost forgotten what opportunity felt like. Enough for gas to get there and maybe get back if it turned out to be nothing. Enough to take a chance on something other than another day in a parking lot watching her daughter pretend everything was fine. She called the number on the letterhead from Sister Agnes's office phone, her voice steadying as she explained who she was. Yes, she had received the letter. Yes, she wanted to accept the inheritance. The attorney, Harold Chen, had a kind voice roughened by age, and he told her that Thomas had been very specific, that the property was to go to Emma Walsh and her daughter, no one else, that everything was in order, that she just needed to come sign the papers and the cabin would be hers. No mortgage, Mr. Chen said. No property taxes for 50 years. Thomas prepaid them through some kind of trust, free and clear. Emma hung up the phone and looked at Sister Agnes, and for the first time in months, maybe years, allowed herself to feel something that might have been hope. I think we are moving to Montana. The hard part came next, though Emma would not realize until later just how hard it would become. She called her older sister Victoria from the payphone outside the library, Sophie at school, the Honda parked in the shade where it would not get too hot inside. It was a mistake born of habit, of operating under the delusion that family meant something. That blood counted for more than it had proven to. Victoria answered on the fifth ring, her voice already impatient, already annoyed. Emma, what is it? I am showing a house in 20 minutes. Dad's Uncle Thomas died. Emma tried to keep her voice neutral, tried not to sound like she was asking for anything. He left me property in Montana, a cabin and land. The silence stretched long enough that Emma thought the connection had dropped. Then Victoria's laugh came through, sharp and cutting like broken glass. A cabin in Montana? Emma, that is pathetic. You cannot handle a studio apartment. You are going to manage property? Just sign it over to me. I will handle the sale. We can split the money. The casual assumption that Emma could not manage her own affairs, that Victoria should automatically take control, sparked something hot and angry in Emma's chest that had been dormant for too long. It is not yours to handle. Thomas left it to me and Sophie specifically. Oh, for God's sake. Victoria's voice went cold, the warmth she used with real estate clients evaporating like morning dew under blowtorch heat. You are living in your car, Emma. You are not exactly making great decisions. Someone needs to step in before you screw this up too. Marcus's voice in the background, muffled like Victoria had her hand over the phone, then more clearly as she switched to speaker. Is that Emma? What does she want now? She inherited some shack in Montana from Dad's weird uncle. Victoria's tone made it clear what she thought of that possibility. Thinks she is going to manage it herself. Marcus's laugh was even harsher than Victoria's, carrying the particular cruelty of someone who had never known real hardship and mistook luck for virtue. Let me guess. You want money to get there? Another loan you will not pay back? The words hit like a slap across the face, stunning in their casual viciousness. Emma's hand tightened on the phone receiver until her knuckles went white. I do not want anything from you. I just thought you should know. How thoughtful. Claire's voice now, the youngest sister, the one who had borrowed $6,000 for a medical emergency that turned out to be a nose job and had never paid back a single cent. Honestly, Emma, after everything we have done for you. Everything you have done for me? Emma's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm, despite knowing that showing emotion was blood in the water for sharks who wore familiar faces. You took Dad's insurance money. All of you said you would pay me back and then you disappeared. Those were loans, not gifts. Marcus's voice turned sharp with the righteousness of someone rewriting history in real time. Not our fault you cannot manage money. You got the same amount we did and somehow you ended up homeless. That is on you. Emma opened her mouth to respond, to point out that she had given them her share on top of their own, that she had believed them when they said family helped family and loans would be repaid when circumstances improved. But a small voice interrupted, high and clear through the phone's speaker, cutting through the ugliness with the precision of a knife. You are mean. All of you are mean. Emma's heart stopped. Sophie. She had forgotten that school let out early on Wednesdays, that Sophie would be at the library where Emma had said to meet her. She must have walked up during the conversation, must have heard everything, must have witnessed her mother being torn apart by people who should have protected them both. Well, if it is not the little tattletale. Victoria's voice dripped false sweetness laced with venom. Emma, you raised a brat. Sophie's voice shook but did not break. This 9-year-old girl who had learned courage in parking lots and bus stations and all the hard places where childhood went to die. You took Grandpa's money. You promised to pay Mom back and you did not. And now you want to take our cabin. The silence that followed was brittle and sharp, the kind that precedes violence or revelation or both. Then Victoria spoke again, voice filled with contempt that made no effort to hide itself anymore. Emma, get control of your daughter and sign over the property. You are not equipped to handle this. Emma hung up the phone, turned to find Sophie standing 3 feet away, backpack slipping off one shoulder, tears streaming down her face, but her jaw set with determination that looked so much like Emma's father in that moment, it made her chest ache. That stubborn refusal to back down from what was right that had been Richard Walsh's defining characteristic, passed down to his granddaughter like a genetic inheritance worth more than money. I am sorry, baby. Emma knelt down on the sidewalk outside the Tacoma Public Library, taking her daughter's face in her hands. You should not have heard that. They are trying to take our cabin. Sophie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, the one great-uncle Thomas left us. Are you going to let them? Emma looked into those serious dark eyes and made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff into air that might hold her or might not. No, I'm not going to let them. That cabin is ours. Thomas wanted us to have it, and we are going to drive to Montana and see it and make it our home if it is even remotely livable. Even if it needs work? Sophie's voice was fierce despite the tears, despite being 9 years old and having every right to be afraid. Even if it needs work. Emma pulled her into a hug. You are good at fixing things, remember? We can fix things together, you and me. That night in the Honda Civic, Sophie could not sleep. She lay in the back seat with streetlights painting orange stripes across the ceiling and tried to imagine what Montana looked like. She had checked out a book from the library about the different states, and the pictures of Montana showed mountains so tall they had snow on top, even in summer. Forests that went on forever, sky so big and blue it did not seem real. She thought about having her own room, about being able to invite Jessica over without having to lie, about her mom not looking so tired all the time. The cabin might be small, might be falling apart, but it would be theirs. Nobody could kick them out. Nobody could tell them to move along. Nobody could take it away. In the front seat, Emma ran the numbers in her head for the 100th time. $1,500 minus gas. The Honda got decent mileage, but it was a 3-day drive. Minus food, minus whatever they would need when they got there. It would be tight, terrifying even, but staying here was its own kind of terrifying. Staying here meant watching Sophie get thinner and quieter, and more skilled at lying about the poverty that was stealing her childhood one parking lot night at a time. Thomas Bennett, whoever he had been, whatever his reasons, had thrown them a lifeline. The only question was whether Emma was brave enough to grab it. Morning came too early, the Walmart parking lot coming to life around them with the pre-dawn shift change. Emma and Sophie went through their routine one last time in Tacoma, knowing it was the last time, that tonight they would be somewhere in eastern Washington or Idaho, that in 3 days they would be in Montana standing in front of a cabin that might change everything or might be another disappointment in a long line of disappointments. They packed the Honda with everything they owned, which did not take long. Clothes and garbage bags, Sophie's school supplies, Emma's nursing textbooks that she had refused to sell no matter how desperate things got, holding on to them like talismans that whispered you were someone once and you will be someone again. Photographs of Emma's father holding infant Sophie with so much love in his eyes it hurt to look at. Back when the world had made sense and family had meant protection instead of betrayal. The last thing Emma packed was the letter from Harold Chen, folded carefully and placed in the glove compartment where she could reach it if she needed proof this was real. Sophie sat in the back seat with her notebook open to a fresh page, ready to document their adventure. She had titled it at the top in her careful printing, The Journey to Our New Home. Below that, she had drawn the Honda Civic with 2 stick figures visible through the windows and mountains in the distance, everything rendered in colored pencil with the hope of someone who still believed good things were possible. They drove out of Tacoma as the sun came up, Interstate 90 stretching east toward the mountains, toward Montana, toward whatever Thomas Bennett had left them. Emma's hands were steady on the wheel, but inside, she felt like she was made of glass. One wrong move from shattering into pieces too small to put back together. Sophie pressed her face to the window and watched Washington state scroll by, the landscape changing from urban sprawl to farmland to forest. Her first real journey beyond the city limits of the place she had been born, the place that had given her nothing but lessons in how to survive. Mom, do you think there will be bears? Maybe. Montana is pretty wild. What about wolves? Probably those too. Sophie's eyes went wide, delighted rather than scared. That is so cool. We are going to live somewhere with actual wild animals. Emma could not help but smile despite everything, her daughter's enthusiasm infectious. We do not know what we are going to find there, baby. It might be really rough. I do not care. Sophie went back to her notebook, starting a new drawing. Anything is better than the parking lot. They drove for hours, stopping only for breaks and bathroom stops, and the cheapest food they could find. Emma let Sophie navigate with a paper map from a gas station, teaching her to read the highway numbers and calculate distances, turning necessity into education the way she had learned to do over the past 2 years. Every hardship was a lesson if you looked at it right. Every struggle was training for the next one. They crossed into Idaho as the sun started to set, found a rest stop with bathrooms and picnic tables, and ate peanut butter sandwiches Emma had made that morning, while Sophie reported on their progress with the seriousness of a military strategist. We went 312 miles today. Tomorrow we have to go about 400 more to get to Montana. Then it is only about 2 hours from the border to Helena, where Mr. Chen's office is. You are a good navigator, kid. Emma watched the last light fade from the sky, stars coming out brighter than she had ever seen them in the city, a reminder that there was a world beyond parking lots and poverty if you were willing to drive far enough to find it. Your grandpa would be proud. Sophie looked up from the map, her face suddenly vulnerable in the way that only children can be when they let their guard down. Do you think he knew about Uncle Thomas leaving us the cabin? I do not know, baby. Maybe. They were family, so maybe they talked. I think he knew. Sophie folded the map carefully along its creases. I think that is why Uncle Thomas left it to us, because Grandpa told him we were good people. Emma's throat tightened. Her father had died 18 months ago, cancer that moved too fast for treatment to matter. And in his final days, he had held her hand and told her she was the strongest person he knew, that she had raised Sophie right despite impossible circumstances, that he was proud of her. She had used his life insurance money, her share of the $17,000, to pay for his funeral and catch up on bills while her siblings had taken theirs and run. She had believed them when they said they needed it, that they would pay her back, that family was supposed to help each other. She had learned the hard way that belief was a luxury she could not afford. They slept in the Honda that night in the rest stop parking lot, semi-trucks idling nearby, the hum of the interstate never quite fading. Emma woke 3 times from dreams where the cabin turned out to be a burned-out shell, where Harold Chen told her there had been a mistake, where her siblings showed up with legal papers proving the property was theirs. Each time she woke, she checked the glove compartment to make sure the letter was still there, solid proof against her anxiety. The second day took them through the rest of Idaho and into Montana, and even Emma, who had been braced for disappointment, felt something shift when they crossed the state line. The sky opened up, impossibly wide and blue, mountains rising in the distance like something out of a storybook. The towns they passed through were small, real small, the kind of places where everyone probably knew everyone else's business, but they were clean and well kept, not the desperate urban decay of Tacoma's outskirts. Sophie kept her face pressed to the window, making little sounds of amazement every time they rounded a curve and the landscape revealed something new. Mom, look, that mountain has snow on the top, even though it is not winter yet. Those are the Rockies, baby. Some of them stay snowy all year round. Can we see them from our cabin? I do not know. Maybe. Emma did not want to promise anything, could not bear the thought of disappointing her daughter again, but she let herself imagine it just for a moment, waking up to mountains outside the window instead of parking lot security guards, air that smelled like pine instead of exhaust, Sophie running through actual woods instead of concrete. They reached Helena late in the afternoon of the third day, 3 days that had drained most of the $1,500 but had also been oddly peaceful, just the two of them, and the road and the slowly changing landscape. Helena was bigger than Emma had expected, an actual city nestled in a valley with mountains on all sides, buildings that looked like they had been there since the gold rush days mixed with modern construction. She found Harold Chen's office on a side street downtown, a brick building with his name on a brass plaque by the door. Sophie held Emma's hand as they climbed the stairs to the second floor, both of them nervous, both trying not to show it. The office was small but neat, leather chairs in the waiting area, diplomas on the wall, a secretary who looked up and smiled when they entered. You must be Miss Walsh. Mr. Chen is expecting you. Harold Chen was 70 if he was a day, with silver hair and a weathered face that suggested he spent more time outdoors than behind a desk. He shook Emma's hand with a firm grip, then knelt down to Sophie's level and offered his hand to her too, treating her like she mattered, like she was part of this transaction rather than just baggage that came along. It is very good to meet you both. Thomas talked about you, you know. Not often, but when he did, it was always with respect. Emma tried to process that. I only met him twice that I can remember, at my father's funeral and maybe once before that. Thomas was a private man. Chen straightened up, gesturing to the chairs. Did not much like crowds or conversation. But he paid attention to people. He saw things. He watched your family from a distance over the years. weddings, funerals, reunions. And he said you were the kind of person who gave without keeping score. He said that was rare. He said you deserved kindness. The words settled into Emma's chest like stones, heavy and warm. Thomas Bennett had seen her when everyone else looked away, had noticed her in the background of family gatherings, had tracked her struggle from 2,000 miles away, had decided she was worth saving when her own siblings had decided she was disposable. The property is ready for transfer. Chen pulled out papers already prepared, tabs marking where Emma needed to sign. All the paperwork is in order. I just need your signature in a few places and then I will drive you out there myself. It is about an hour and a half on decent roads, then another 30 minutes on Forest Service roads that are less decent. What is it like? Emma's voice came out smaller than she intended. The cabin? Chen considered the question carefully, choosing his words with the precision of someone who understood that hope was fragile and disappointment could kill it. It is remote, very remote. No power lines running out there, though. Thomas installed solar panels about 10 years back, hand pump for water from a well, wood stove for heat and cooking. It is rustic and it is not going to be easy, but it is solid. Thomas built it himself back in the 50s and he maintained it right up until he died. It is more than a shack if that is what you are worried about. Emma signed the papers where Chen indicated, her hands shaking slightly, making her signature look jagged and uncertain. Sophie watched with wide eyes, understanding in her child's way that something important was happening, that their lives were changing in this moment in ways they could not yet comprehend. When it was done, when the deed had been transferred and notarized and filed, Chen pulled out a brass key from his desk drawer, old and worn smooth by decades of use, and handed it to Emma. Welcome home, Miss Walsh. They left the Honda in Helena at Chen's suggestion. The Forest Service roads were not kind to low-clearance vehicles and they piled into his pickup truck, a battered Chevy that had clearly seen better decades but still ran strong. Sophie sat between them, bouncing with barely contained excitement, asking questions faster than Chen could answer them. Did Thomas have any pets? No, he lived alone. Were there really bears? Yes, black bears mostly, but they generally stayed away from people. Could she learn to ride a horse? Well, they did not have a horse, but maybe someday. The drive out of Helena took them through increasingly wild country, paved roads giving way to gravel, gravel giving way to dirt tracks barely wider than the truck. The forest closed in on both sides, pine and fir and aspen, the late afternoon sun slanting through the branches in golden bars that looked like something out of a painting. Chen drove with the easy confidence of someone who had made this trip many times, and he told them stories about Thomas, filling in the outline of a man Emma had never really known. He was a Vietnam vet like your father, came back in '68 and could not settle back into regular life. He worked as an accountant for a few years in Seattle, saved every penny, then bought this land and disappeared into the woods. Built the cabin over 2 summers, living in a tent while he worked. Never married, never had kids, just him and the forest for 37 years. Why did he leave it to us? Sophie's question was the same one that had been circling Emma's mind since the letter arrived. Chen glanced down at her, then at Emma. He said you reminded him of a different time when people kept their word. He watched your family from a distance, and he said you were the only one who gave without keeping score, that your siblings took but you gave. He respected that. Emma felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. Thomas had seen her, had noticed even from a distance, even when she had felt invisible to everyone who should have cared. He had left her something precious, not because she had asked for it, but because he had decided she deserved it. The weight of that gift, the responsibility and the hope in the sheer improbability of it, made her chest ache. The truck rounded a final curve and the forest opened into a clearing, and there it was, the cabin. 2 stories of hand-hewn logs darkened by weather and time to a deep honey color. A steep metal roof gone green with age but clearly still sound. A stone chimney rising from the center like a promise of warmth. A wide porch wrapped around the front, the railings carved with intricate patterns that must have taken months to complete. And behind the cabin, mountains rose purple and magnificent against the evening sky, so beautiful it almost hurt to look at them. It was not a shack. It was not some falling down disaster. It was a home, a real home, built with care and maintained with love by a man who had decided for reasons Emma would probably never fully understand that she and her daughter deserved it. Sophie gasped, a small sound of pure wonder, and scrambled out of the truck before it had fully stopped. Emma followed more slowly, her legs unsteady, unable to quite believe what she was seeing. This could not be real. Things like this did not happen to people like her. The universe did not hand out miracles to single mothers living in Honda Civics behind Walmart. Chen handed Emma the key, brass and heavy in her palm. I will leave you to it. There is a care package inside, food and firewood to get you started. I will come back in a few days to check on you and bring any supplies you need. But for now, it is all yours. Emma turned the key over in her fingers, feeling the weight of it, then looked down at Sophie, who was practically vibrating with excitement. Want to do the honors? Sophie took the key with both hands, approached the front door like it was something sacred, and carefully fitted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, well-oiled despite decades of use, and the door swung open with a soft creak that sounded like welcome. Warm air rolled out carrying the scent of wood smoke and pine, and something else, something that felt like peace distilled into atmosphere. Sophie stepped over the threshold first, Emma right behind her, and together they entered Thomas Bennett's cabin. Their cabin now, and Emma heard her daughter whisper, her voice full of awe and gratitude and hope that had survived 2 years in a parking lot. We have a home. Emma stood in the doorway as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, and felt something settle inside her that had been restless for so long she had forgotten what stillness felt like. They had a home, not borrowed, not temporary, not dependent on anyone's charity or goodwill. Theirs. Free and clear, as Harold Chen had said, the words taking on almost religious significance. Thomas Bennett had been a stranger, a ghost from her father's past, a man she could not remember meeting more than twice in her entire life. But he had seen her when she was invisible. He had watched her struggle and decided she was worth saving. He had built something that would outlast him and left it in her hands, trusting that she would know what to do with it. She did not know what to do with it yet, did not know how they would manage without running water or electricity from the grid, did not know if her siblings would come for them or if the cabin would prove too hard to maintain, or if she was about to fail spectacularly at this chance she had been given. But standing there with Sophie's hand in hers and mountains standing eternal watch in the smell of pine in the air, Emma Walsh allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that maybe the universe did hand out miracles sometimes. Maybe character did matter more than blood. Maybe giving without keeping score was not foolishness, but the truest measure of worth. Maybe Thomas Bennett had known something about her that she had forgotten about herself, something that 2 years of parking lots could not quite destroy. The fragile peace lasted exactly 1 week. Then the world found out about Thomas Bennett's $265 million gift to a homeless single mother, and the wolves arrived with lawyers and cameras and a plan to prove Emma Walsh was too broken to deserve what she had been given. They were wrong, but proving it would cost everything she had left. The first morning in the cabin, Sophie woke to silence so complete it felt like the world had been remade overnight. No traffic sounds, no voices from other cars in the parking lot, no mechanical hum of refrigerated trucks making deliveries. Just birds, dozens of them, calling to each other through the forest in a language she did not understand but wanted to learn. She lay in the smaller upstairs bedroom under quilts Thomas Bennett had made or bought decades ago, heavy and warm, and watched sunlight move across the pine plank ceiling in patterns that shifted with the breeze outside. Her stuffed rabbit sat on the windowsill, looking out at mountains that seemed close enough to touch. And for the first time in her 9 years, Sophie understood what the word home actually meant. Not just a roof and walls, but a feeling of permanence, of belonging, of safety that did not depend on parking lot security guards deciding whether to let them stay another night. Downstairs, Emma stood at the kitchen window watching her daughter explore the clearing outside, running from tree to tree with energy that had been compressed too long in the Honda's back seat. The hand pump at the sink had taken some getting used to, her nursing school muscles remembering the rhythm after a few tries, and the water that came up was so cold and clear, it tasted like it had never touched anything human before. The wood stove radiated steady heat from the fire she had built using kindling. Thomas had split and stacked with such precision it seemed wrong to disturb it. Coffee percolated in an ancient enamel pot that had probably sat on this same stove for 40 years, and Emma allowed herself to feel something dangerously close to contentment. They had made it. 3 days and 2,000 miles from parking lot to paradise, from desperation to something that might actually be hope if she was brave enough to claim it. The cabin revealed itself slowly over those first days, each room a study in self-sufficiency and meticulous care. Thomas Bennett's workshop in the back held tools organized with military precision, each one clean and oiled, and hung on pegboard with its outline traced in black marker so you knew exactly where it belonged. The root cellar stayed cool even in afternoon heat, shelves lined with mason jars full of preserves that were probably still good, vegetables Thomas had grown and put up himself before he died. Upstairs, his bedroom held almost nothing personal. A narrow bed made with hospital corners, a dresser with drawers that slid smooth on waxed runners, a single photograph of a much younger man in army fatigues standing next to a helicopter with Vietnam's jungle behind him. Emma studied that photograph for a long time, trying to reconcile the serious-faced soldier with the man who had built this sanctuary in the mountains and left it to a niece he had barely known. The face in the photograph was unlined, maybe 25 or 26, with eyes that looked directly at the camera without flinching. There was something in those eyes that made Emma think of Sophie, that same quality of seeing more than you should have to see and surviving it anyway. Whatever Thomas Bennett had experienced in that jungle had marked him, carved something into his character that 40 years in Montana could not quite erase. Sophie made discoveries daily, her child's curiosity uncovering things Emma's practical mind might have missed. A carved wooden box under the eaves held Thomas's war medals, Bronze Star and Purple Heart, wrapped in cloth that had kept them from tarnishing. The citations that came with them were typed on forms gone yellow with age, the words formal and inadequate. For heroic achievement in ground combat against hostile forces, for wounds received in action. Dry, bureaucratic language that could not capture what it meant to earn such things. A bookshelf in the main room concealed a fold-down desk behind a false front, the surface scarred with decades of use and covered in Thomas's careful handwriting. Lists, calculations, observations about weather and wildlife, and the slow passage of seasons. She found bird nests tucked into the porch rafters, a family of mice living in the woodshed who scattered when she opened the door, and a trail through the forest that led to a creek so clear you could count individual stones on the bottom. It was Sophie who first noticed something odd about the main room's dimensions. She had been measuring things with a tape measure from Thomas's workshop, making a map of the cabin in her notebook with careful attention to scale, when she frowned and redid her calculations twice to make sure. "Mom." Sophie came upstairs where Emma was replacing a broken pane in one of the windows, her notebook open and pencil tapping against the page. "I think there is a secret room." "What makes you think that?" "The math does not work." Sophie showed her the notebook where she had drawn the cabin's floor plan with measurements written in her neat printing. The outside wall is 42 feet, but the inside rooms only add up to 38 feet. That is 4 feet missing. That is too much for just walls and insulation. The tape measure proved Sophie right. Emma walked the perimeter of the main floor counting her steps, then did the interior and came up 4 feet short each time. They studied the walls together looking for seams or breaks in the logs, but everything appeared solid and continuous. The craftsmanship so precise you could barely see where one log ended and another began. The stone fireplace dominated the north wall, massive and beautifully constructed from river rock fitted together with barely visible mortar. It was the kind of work that took months, the kind of patience that came from having nothing but time and the determination to do things right. Emma ran her hands over the stones, looking for anything that might move, while Sophie examined the carved mantel with its patterns of leaves and vines and birds. The birds were everywhere in the carving, dozens of different species rendered in such detail, you could almost identify them. Hawks and owls, songbirds and woodpeckers, each one different, each one perfect. But one bird, a small wren near the bottom right corner, seemed different. The carving was slightly deeper, the wood around it worn smooth as if someone had touched it repeatedly over years. Sophie pressed it experimentally and felt it give slightly inward with a soft click that seemed too loud in the quiet cabin. The sound that followed was subtle but unmistakable. Stone grinding against stone somewhere behind the fireplace. Mechanisms engaging that had been silent for months or years. Emma stepped back quickly, pulling Sophie with her, as a section of floor in front of the hearth separated from the rest, with a hairline crack that became visible as dust that had settled into the seam suddenly broke free. The panel was 4 feet square, perfectly fitted, and it lifted on some kind of counterweight mechanism when Emma worked her fingers into the crack and pulled. The wood was heavy, solid, but it moved smoothly once she got it started, revealing stone steps that descended into darkness below the cabin. The steps were narrow and steep, carved directly into bedrock, disappearing down into black that seemed to swallow light. Emma found a flashlight in Thomas's workshop, tested it to make sure the battery still held charge, and stood at the top of those steps, trying to decide if she was brave enough to go down. Part of her wanted to close the panel and forget they had found it, to pretend that whatever waited below could stay buried. But Sophie pressed against her side, not scared but vibrating with excitement, and Emma felt her daughter's absolute faith that whatever lay below would be good, would be more of Thomas's gifts, would be another piece of the puzzle falling into place. The stairs ended 12 feet down in a chamber that took Emma's breath away. The ceiling was vaulted and supported by hand-hewn beams that must have taken months to shape and place. The walls were smooth stone, not rough bedrock, but worked surfaces that showed tool marks from careful chiseling. And shelves lined them floor to ceiling, organized with the same meticulous care as the workshop upstairs. Wooden crates were stacked carefully, each one labeled with numbers and dates in Thomas's precise script. Leather-bound books arranged by size filled one entire wall. Glass-fronted cabinets held objects Emma could not immediately identify in the flashlight's beam. And in the center of it all sat a massive oak desk with papers arranged in neat stacks and a journal lying open as if Thomas had just stepped away and would return any moment. Sophie moved to the desk while Emma stood frozen, her nurse's brain trying to process what she was seeing and coming up blank. This was not a root cellar or a storm shelter. This was something else entirely, something built with purpose and planning that went far beyond simple survival. The journal's open page showed columns of items and numbers, dates ranging from the early 1960s through the 1990s. Each entry meticulously documented in handwriting that barely changed over 3 decades. Sophie picked up the journal carefully, both hands supporting the leather binding, and brought it to her mother. The title page read Private Collection and Estate Records, property of Thomas James Bennett, begun January 7, 1963, updated through September 2, 1994. And below that, in slightly different ink as if added later, a dedication that made Emma's hands shake. For Emma and Sophie, should you find this, everything here is yours now. I trust you will know what to do. Emma's fingers trembled as she turned pages. The flashlight balanced on the desk, casting shadows that made the numbers seem to dance. Entry after entry, each one listing an item purchased, the price paid, authentication details, and current estimated value. A landscape painting by Albert Bierstadt, bought at an estate sale in Portland for $375 in 1963, now worth $52,000. A first edition Shakespeare folio purchased for $800 in 1964, currently valued at $120,000. The numbers grew as she flipped forward through the years. Paintings by artists Emma vaguely recognized from art history classes she had taken in nursing school. Andrew Wyeth, Mary Cassatt, Winslow Homer. Names that belonged in museums, not in a vault under a cabin in Montana. Stock certificates from the 1970s. Companies that had seemed like risky bets at the time, but had become household names. Apple Computer, Microsoft Corporation, International Business Machines. Sophie pulled open the nearest crate using a pry bar she found leaning against the desk. Old enough to know to be careful but too curious to wait. Yellowed newspaper from 1968 wrapped around a painting, oil on canvas, mountains and clouds rendered in dramatic strokes that made the scene feel alive. The signature in the corner matched the journal entry, Bierstadt, and Emma lifted it carefully, the framed solid wood gone dark with age, and leaned it against the desk where they could see it better. The painting alone, according to Thomas's notes, was worth enough to buy a house. A nice house, maybe several. Emma set it down with shaking hands and opened another crate, then another. Each discovery more impossible than the last. A bronze sculpture of a running horse, patina green and beautiful, muscles captured mid-stride with such precision you could almost see it move. Ancient coins in velvet-lined cases, Roman and Byzantine and Chinese, each one labeled with acquisition date and provenance. First edition books by Mark Twain and Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald, their dust jackets protected in archival sleeves that had kept them pristine for decades. A framed map from 1702 showing territories that did not exist anymore, hand-colored and gorgeous in its age. Financial ledgers revealed stock purchases that had multiplied 100-fold, bonds that had matured and been reinvested, a patient and disciplined approach to building wealth that had compounded over decades into something that defied comprehension. Emma traced her finger down columns of numbers, watching small investments from the 1970s become fortunes in the 1990s, watching Thomas Bennett's methodical genius transform pennies into millions. The final page of the main journal stopped Emma's breath completely. Thomas's neat handwriting, dated September 2nd, 1994, 6 months before his death according to Harold Chen. Final accounting as of this date, total estimated value of collection based on current market conditions and professional appraisals completed August 1994. Paintings and sculptures, $73,200,000. Rare books and manuscripts, $18,500,000. Coins and precious metals, $42,800,000. Stocks and bonds, $112,300,000. Miscellaneous items, $18,200,000. Total estimated value, $265 million. Emma read the number 3 times, her vision blurring before she could make herself believe it. $265 million. Hidden in a vault under a cabin in Montana, left by a man who had lived alone for 37 years and apparently never told anyone what he had been building down here. She looked at Sophie, who was carefully examining a collection of jeweled brooches in a glass case, and tried to understand what this meant, what it changed, what Thomas had given them that went so far beyond a roof over their heads, it defied comprehension. A separate letter tucked into the journal's back cover, addressed in Thomas's hand. For Emma Walsh, should she find this collection? Emma's fingers trembled as she unfolded the paper. Decades old, but preserved perfectly in the underground chamber's constant temperature. The words swam for a moment before focusing. Dear Emma, I watched you grow up from a distance, saw you at family reunions, weddings, funerals, all the obligatory gatherings that families convince themselves matter. I saw you care for your father in his final illness, saw how you raised Sophie alone with dignity when her father proved himself unworthy. I saw how your siblings took and took, how you gave and gave, how they made you believe that was what family meant. This collection represents my life's work, 37 years of patience and faith that beauty and value are worth preserving. I leave it to you because you understand what truly matters. Not wealth, but character. Not taking, but giving. Your siblings will come when they find out. They will claim you are not capable of managing this, that you need their help, that family means sharing. Stand firm. This is yours. Earn it not by blood, but by being the kind of person who deserves it. Use it to give Sophie the life she has earned by being brave enough to have you as her mother. With respect and hope for your future, Thomas James Bennett. Emma had to sit down on the stone floor, the letter clutched in both hands, and let herself cry for the first time since they had arrived. These were not the silent tears she had learned to shed in the Honda while Sophie slept. The grief and frustration and fear she had carried for 2 years pressed down into something small enough to hide. These were different, complicated, relief and gratitude and a kind of grief for a man she had never really known, but who had seen her more clearly than anyone in her life, except maybe her father. Thomas had watched her fail and struggle and lose everything, and instead of judging her, he had decided she deserved better. He had built this gift over decades and saved it for someone he believed would use it right. And somehow, impossibly, he had chosen her, had looked at a family full of people who shared his blood and picked the one who passed whatever test he had been administering from his cabin in the mountains. Sophie found a second letter in a small wooden box behind the desk, this one addressed in the same handwriting. To Sophie, the brave girl who finds my secret. She brought it to Emma, who read it aloud, her voice still thick with tears. Dear Sophie, if you are reading this, you found my hidden room. You must be clever and curious, which are fine qualities. This room holds many valuable things, but the most valuable thing is the family who found it together. I never had children of my own, but I watched your mother raise you, and I saw how much she gave to make sure you were fed and safe and loved. I hope you know how lucky you are to have her, and I hope she knows how lucky she is to have you. Whatever happens with this collection, remember your mother is a good person in a world that often punishes good people. Protect her. She spent her whole life protecting you. Be brave, little one. The world needs more brave children. Your friend across time, Thomas. Sophie pressed close to Emma's side, small and warm and steady. He knew about me, even though I was not born yet when he wrote this. He knew there would be someone like you. Emma wrapped her arm around her daughter's shoulders. Someone worth everything I have been through to get here. They climbed back upstairs as evening fell, closing the hidden entrance carefully behind them, the carved wrens settling back into place with a soft click that sealed $265 million beneath their feet. They sat together on the porch watching the sun paint the mountains purple and gold, and Emma's mind raced through implications and complications, through the certainty that this would change everything, that her siblings would find out somehow, that the peace of these first days was about to shatter. But for now, for this moment, she let herself simply sit with her daughter in front of their home, while mountains stood eternal and patient in the distance, and tried to accept that sometimes, rarely, impossibly, the universe gave you exactly what you needed when you needed it most. On the fourth morning, a pickup truck pulled up the dirt road, and Emma tensed immediately. Old instincts from 2 years of parking lot living making her scan for threats. But the man who stepped out had kind eyes and scarred hands, and the bearing of someone who had seen combat and come back changed but not broken. "Miss Walsh, I am James Crawford. Harold Chen sent me to check on you." James was maybe 40, with the kind of weathered face that came from working outdoors and the careful movements of someone who knew his body and its limits. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt and work boots that had been resoled more than once, practical clothes for practical work. His handshake was firm, but not aggressive, meeting Emma's eyes with the directness of someone who had nothing to hide. "Mr. Chen asked me to make sure everything is working properly. The stove, the pump, the solar panels. I am a carpenter, do a lot of work around Cedar Falls. He thought you might need some help getting settled." Emma studied him for a moment, looking for the angle, the hidden agenda, the way men who showed up offering help usually wanted something in return. But James just stood there, patient and calm, waiting for her to decide whether to trust him. "That would be helpful, thank you." James spent the next hour inspecting the cabin with a professional eye, checking the wood stove's damper and flue, replacing a leather washer in the hand pump that had been starting to wear, testing the solar panel connections that fed the batteries in the basement. He moved through the space with the confidence of someone who understood how things worked, how they broke, how to fix them. Sophie appeared from the forest where she had been exploring, curious about the stranger in their cabin. James knelt down to her level when Emma introduced them, treating her with the same respect he had shown Emma, as if a 9-year-old's opinion mattered just as much as an adult's. "Did you know Uncle Thomas? Met him a few times?" James's voice was quiet, measured. He was a quiet man himself, did not talk much, but you could tell he knew things, understood how the world worked. Veteran like me. We understood each other without needing many words. "You were in the war too?" "Iraq, 2005 through 2007. Army Rangers." James straightened up, his eyes going distant for a moment before returning to the present. "Came back and could not settle into regular life for a while. Found peace in Montana, working with my hands, building things that last. Like the cabin, like the cabin." James smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face into something younger. "Thomas built this right. Solid joinery, proper drainage, everything done the way it should be done. It will stand another 100 years if you take care of it." Before he left, James had pulled a business card from his wallet and handed it to Emma. "If you need anything, I am 20 minutes away. Good with tools and good with problems." His eyes held hers for a moment, and Emma saw something there that made her think he knew more than he was saying. That Harold Chen had told him something about why a homeless single mother and her daughter had inherited a cabin in the middle of nowhere. "Thank you." Emma took the card, studying the simple printing. "James Crawford, carpenter. A phone number. An address in Cedar Falls. I appreciate it." After he left, Sophie asked the question Emma had been thinking. "Why do you think Mr. Chen sent him?" "I think he knows we might need allies." Emma tucked the card into her pocket. "I think he is making sure we are not alone out here." She was right, though she did not know yet how right she was, or how soon they would need every ally they could find. The fragile peace lasted exactly 1 week, just as Emma had feared. On the seventh day, a car pulled up the dirt road, not James Crawford's truck, but something expensive, something that did not belong on Forest Service roads. Two people climbed out, a man with a camera and a woman with a notebook, and Emma's stomach dropped as she recognized them for what they were. Reporters. "Miss Walsh?" the woman called out, friendly, professional. "I am Jennifer Torres from the Helena Independent Record. We heard about your inheritance and we would love to do a story, local interest piece about Thomas Bennett and his incredible generosity." Emma stood on the porch with Sophie behind her and felt the trap closing even before it snapped shut. "I am not interested in publicity. Thank you." "It is a wonderful story," the woman persisted, still smiling. "Homeless single mother inherits property from veteran uncle she barely knew. People love stories like this. It gives them hope." My answer is no. But the damage was already done. The photographer had been taking pictures the entire time. Emma and Sophie on the porch, the cabin in the background, the Honda Civic still parked where Harold Chen had helped her leave it. The story would run with or without her cooperation, painting her however they wanted to paint her, and her siblings would see it and know, and then the real war would begin. The article appeared 3 days later in the Helena Independent Record, picked up by the Associated Press within hours and spreading across the internet like wildfire. "Montana recluse leaves fortune to homeless. Single mother." The headline made it sound like a fairy tale, like something too good to be true, and buried in the article was the speculation that had doomed her from the start. Sources familiar with the estate suggest the property and potential collection could be worth millions, though exact valuations have not been made public. The piece included Emma's lack of comment, Sophie visible in the background of the photo, the cabin that looked too nice to be real, and her phone, the cheap prepaid cell phone she had kept charged for emergencies, started ringing with numbers she did not recognize. She ignored them all, except one. Her sister Victoria's number appeared on the screen, and Emma almost did not answer, almost let it go to voicemail. But some stubborn part of her wanted to hear what Victoria would say now that the stakes had changed. "Emma," Victoria's voice came through bright and concerned, the real estate agent pitch she used on clients who needed to be convinced they wanted something they could not afford. "I have been trying to reach you for days. I saw the news story about Thomas's collection. Honey, that is amazing, but you must be overwhelmed. I am handling it. A small-town Montana lawyer?" Victoria laughed, not unkindly, but with the casual condescension of someone who had always had more money, more education, more everything. "Emma, be realistic. This is potentially worth millions. You need a team. Proper representation. Kyle and I have been talking, and we think it would be best if we came up to help you sort through everything. Get proper appraisals, figure out the taxes, make sure you are protected." The word protected in Victoria's mouth sounded like a threat dressed up as concern. "I am handling it," Emma repeated. "I have an attorney and I will be hiring experts to help with the collection. I do not need your help." The pause that followed was long enough that Emma could almost hear Victoria recalculating, adjusting her strategy. "That is not fair, Emma. We are family. We should stick together on this. Like we stuck together when I was living in my car?" Another pause, and when Victoria spoke again, the warmth had drained from her voice like someone had flipped a switch. "That is not fair and you know it. We all had our own problems. But this is different. This is important. And I was not important. Do not be dramatic. Look, Kyle has already talked to a lawyer friend who specializes in estate management. We just want to make sure you do not screw this up. Given your history with financial decisions and your current situation, you understand why we are concerned." Emma hung up. Her hands shook with anger rather than fear this time, a different kind of trembling that felt almost cleansing. She had spent 2 years believing she had somehow failed, that her homelessness was evidence of poor judgment rather than bad luck and family betrayal. But Thomas's letters had shifted something fundamental in how she saw herself. And Victoria's casual assumption that Emma could not handle her own affairs bounced off that new understanding like rain off stone. Sophie looked up from her homework spread across the kitchen table, where real sunlight came through real windows in a real house that belonged to them. "Was that Aunt Victoria?" "Yeah, baby. What did she want?" "What she always wants." Emma set the phone down with more force than necessary, to take control of something that is not hers. "Are you going to let her?" Emma met her daughter's serious dark eyes and felt something settle into place, solid and unmovable as the mountains outside. Not a chance. But Victoria's call was just the opening salvo in a war that Emma did not yet understand she was fighting. Her siblings had seen the news story, had done their own research, had discovered or guessed at the vault's existence, and they were coming with lawyers and cameras and a plan to take what Thomas Bennett had left to someone else. The wolves had arrived just as Thomas had predicted, and Emma Walsh, who had survived 2 years in a Honda Civic and raised a daughter alone, and kept her character intact when everyone around her was proving how easy it was to sell your soul, was about to discover what it meant to fight for something worth fighting for. Thomas Bennett had given her the tools. Now she would have to learn how to use them, and fast, because the people who shared her blood were about to prove once and for all that character mattered more than genetics, that family was what you built rather than what you were born into, and that sometimes the hardest battles were the ones you fought against people who were supposed to love you. The vault beneath the cabin held $265 million in carefully curated treasures. But the real gift Thomas had left was something you could not put a price on. He had seen Emma Walsh when she was invisible, had watched her character under pressure, had decided she was worth saving when everyone else had decided she was disposable. And that belief, that validation from a man who had survived Vietnam and built an empire in silence, was worth more than all the paintings and stocks and ancient coins combined. Emma stood at the kitchen window watching Sophie chase a butterfly through the clearing, 9 years old and laughing, and made a promise to the ghost of Thomas Bennett. I will not let them take this. I will fight them with everything you gave me. I will prove you were right to believe in me. The mountains stood watch, patient and eternal, keeping their secrets. And somewhere deep in the bedrock beneath the cabin, in a vault built to last centuries, Thomas Bennett's legacy waited to be claimed by the woman he had chosen across time and distance to be its guardian. Harold Chen arrived at the cabin 3 days after the newspaper story broke, his truck kicking up dust on the Forest Service road that still showed tire tracks from the reporters who had started this avalanche. He brought 2 people Emma had never met, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a sharper business suit, and a man in his 40s who carried himself with the calm confidence of someone used to courtrooms and the lies people told there. Patricia Morgan specialized in estate law for high net worth individuals, which was a polite way of saying she helped rich people protect their money from other rich people who wanted to take it. Robert Kane defended against frivolous guardianship claims, which was a polite way of saying he fought families who tried to declare their relatives incompetent so they could control their assets. They sat around Thomas Bennett's handmade table while Emma told them everything, from the stolen insurance money to living in the Honda, to finding the vault to Victoria's phone call yesterday. Patricia took notes in a leather portfolio, her pen moving steadily across the page in script so precise it looked like printing. First thing we do is establish a trust. Everything goes into it with you as sole trustee. Even if they somehow convinced a court you were incompetent, which they will not, the trust protects the assets. They cannot touch it, but they can make our lives hell trying. Robert leaned back in his chair, studying Emma with an expression she could not quite read. Frivolous lawsuits, depositions, court hearings designed to humiliate and exhaust. They can leak information to the press, turn this into a media circus. They can drag you through the mud publicly while we fight them in court. The question is not whether you fight, but how well prepared you are when they show up. How long would that take? Depends on how determined they are. Robert's voice was matter of fact, delivering bad news like a weather report. 6 months to a year, maybe more if they keep filing new motions. They will claim you are mentally unstable, financially irresponsible, an unfit mother living in conditions unsuitable for a child. They will bring witnesses who will testify to your poor judgment. They will paint themselves as concerned family members trying to protect you from yourself. Emma looked at Sophie, who had been sitting quietly in the corner with her notebook, drawing houses like she always did when she needed to feel safe. A year of fighting, of having her fitness as a mother questioned publicly, of Sophie hearing strangers debate whether Emma was capable of caring for her. The thought made her feel sick. What is the alternative? There is not one. Patricia's voice was gentle but firm. Not if you want to keep what is yours. Thomas left this to you specifically. Your siblings have no legal claim, but that will not stop them from trying. We fight or we surrender, and surrender is not an option I recommend. They spent 3 days building Emma's defense before her siblings even filed papers. A psychologist in Helena evaluated Emma over 2 hours of testing and conversation, asking questions about her mental state, her decision-making process, her plans for the future. The doctor's report, delivered 24 hours later, pronounced Emma sharp, competent, showing no signs of impaired judgment. In fact, the doctor noted in careful professional language, Emma had demonstrated remarkable resilience and clear thinking despite circumstances that would have broken many people. Financial records documented the systematic drainage of her father's insurance money, each loan carefully noted with dates and amounts and promises made and broken. Text messages and emails where Emma had asked for repayment and been ignored or blocked. The digital trail of betrayal laid out in timestamps and red receipts. Character references from Sister Agnes at the shelter, from Sophie's teacher who could attest that despite homelessness, Lily had never missed school, from the director of the YMCA where Emma had volunteered in exchange for shower privileges. Margaret Sullivan came to the cabin uninvited but welcome, a folder under her arm that she had been keeping for years without quite knowing why. Inside were newspaper clippings spanning decades, articles about art sales and market trends in technology stocks, all of them with notes in the margins in Margaret's neat handwriting connecting them to Thomas Bennett. I tracked his investments. Margaret's voice carried a note of apology, as if researching a neighbor's financial activities might be considered intrusion rather than curiosity. Small town, not much else to do, and I was curious. He would mention things sometimes when he came in for books, little comments about art or markets, and I would research them later. He was always right, always ahead of everyone else. It was remarkable. Emma studied the clippings, the pattern they revealed of a man with remarkable foresight and patience. Why would he talk to you about it? I do not think he meant to. Margaret's expression softened with memory. I think he was just lonely sometimes. And when you know something important, you need to tell someone even if they do not fully understand it. He talked about you once after your father's funeral, said you were the kind of person who gave without keeping score, and that was rare. Said he hoped life would be kinder to you than it had been. He decided to be that kindness himself. Yes, he did. The preparation was methodical and thorough, building a case that would withstand whatever assault Emma's siblings launched. But the waiting was worse than the work. The anticipation of violence not yet arrived, the certainty that it was coming but not knowing when or how hard it would hit. Marcus and Claire arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, their rental SUV expensive and out of place on the Forest Service Road, churning up gravel and dust like an invasion force. Victoria came separately in her BMW, followed by a man in a suit who introduced himself as Gerald Thorne, attorney at law, and a woman with a professional camera who started taking photographs the moment they climbed out of their vehicles. Emma watched them approach from the porch. Sophie pressed against her side and felt something fierce and protective rise up in her chest. They had come to take what Thomas had given her, to convince a court she was not capable, to tear down in an afternoon what she had been building for weeks. But they had not counted on Thomas's foresight, on the legal team he had effectively hired from beyond the grave by leaving enough money to afford the best defense, on the fact that Emma Walsh was not the broken woman they remembered, but someone who had survived 2 years of homelessness and come out stronger. Victoria climbed the porch steps with a smile that did not reach her eyes, the expression she used on difficult sellers who needed to be convinced their house was worth less than they thought. Emma, the cabin is lovely, very rustic. I can see why you would want to hold on to it. It is my home. Emma's voice was steady, calm. Thomas left it to me and Sophie. Of course he did. Victoria's tone suggested this was both obvious and irrelevant. But honey, be realistic. There is no way you can manage a collection worth this much. You do not have the expertise, the connections, the financial literacy. Someone needs to step in before this becomes a disaster. It is not yours to handle. Emma kept her voice level, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her anger. Thomas left it to me and Sophie specifically. Marcus pushed past Victoria, his face already red with the anger that seemed to be his permanent state these days. The frustrated rage of someone who believed the world owed him something and was tired of waiting to collect. We are family, Emma. That collection should be split 5 ways. It is not fair that Thomas left everything to you just because you were convenient. Sophie's voice cut through before Emma could respond, high and clear and shaking with fury that a 9-year-old should not have to feel. My mom is not convenient. She is good. And you took Grandpa's money and left us in a parking lot. Gerald Thorne stepped forward smoothly, his briefcase clicking open with practiced precision. Miss Walsh, I represent your siblings in this matter. We are filing a petition for guardianship based on concerns about your capacity to manage a substantial estate. Your history of housing instability, financial difficulties, and current situation raising a minor child in substandard conditions raises serious questions about judgment. Emma took the thick stack of papers he held out, refusing to let her hands shake. I have a home. Thomas gave me one. A cabin with no running water from municipal sources, no electricity from the grid, miles from the nearest town. Thorne's voice carried the condescension of someone who had never had to question whether he would have a roof over his head. That is not a suitable environment for a child, Miss Walsh. These papers are copies of our petition. You will be served officially within 48 hours. I would advise you to get legal representation, though I doubt you can afford anyone who could effectively oppose us. Emma looked at the papers in her hands, legal language designed to paint her as incompetent and dangerous, and felt a cold rage settle into her bones. She had been afraid when Victoria called, uncertain when the reporter showed up, but now she was just angry, the kind of anger that burns clean and gives you clarity instead of consuming you. Claire stepped forward, her voice softer than the others, but no less cutting, the concerned sister routine she had perfected over years of manipulating people into giving her what she wanted. Emma, we are doing this for Sophie. You have been through so much and we are worried about your mental state. Living in a car with a child, that is traumatic. You need help. I needed help 2 years ago. Emma's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. You all made it very clear help was not coming. Those were loans. Marcus's voice turned sharp with self-righteousness. Not our fault you cannot manage money. You got the same amount we did, and somehow you ended up homeless. That is on you. You took my share on top of yours. Emma felt Sophie's hand slip into hers, small and warm and anchoring. You promised to pay it back, and then you disappeared. And now you show up because suddenly there is more to take, and you want me to believe it is because you care about Sophie, about me. Victoria's mask finally cracked, irritation flashing across her features like lightning before thunder. This is not about the past, Emma. This is about protecting assets that should belong to all of us. Thomas was Dad's uncle, which makes him family to all of us. He did not leave it to all of you. Emma's voice was hard now, all the softness burned away. He left it to me specifically because he knew exactly what kind of people you are. The photographer had been taking pictures throughout the exchange, her camera clicking constantly, capturing Emma's anger and Sophie's tears and the tableau of family betrayal played out on a porch in Montana. Emma realized too late this was all theater, all designed to paint her as unstable and her siblings as concerned family members trying to help, evidence they would use in court to prove she was unfit. Marcus noticed her looking at the camera and smirked, the expression of someone who thought they had already won. Hope you are ready for this to get ugly, Emma, because it is going to. We will prove you are unfit to manage this estate, unfit to raise Sophie in these conditions, unfit period. And then everything Thomas left you will be liquidated and properly distributed among family. Get off my property. This is not over. Victoria turned on her heel, gesturing for the others to follow. We will see you in court, Emma, and when the judge sees what kind of mother lets her daughter live in a car, when they see your history of poor decisions and instability, we will be appointed guardians. And you will be lucky if you get supervised visitation. They left in a spray of gravel, their expensive vehicles churning up dust that hung in the air long after they disappeared down the Forest Service road. Emma stood on the porch with Sophie pressed against her side and let herself shake. Let the fear show now that her siblings could not see it. She had known they would come, Thomas had warned her, but knowing and experiencing were different things, and the reality of their cruelty, their willingness to weaponize her homelessness and use Sophie as leverage, hit harder than she had expected. Sheriff Tom Whitaker arrived an hour later, having been called by Harold Chen, who had heard from Margaret Sullivan, who had heard from someone else that Emma's family had shown up. Small-town information networks worked faster than cell phones and with more accuracy. He walked the property with Emma, documenting everything with the methodical attention of someone who understood that details mattered in court. When they found the GPS tracker stuck to the underside of the Honda's bumper, his expression went hard. the easygoing small-town sheriff replaced by someone who had seen too many domestic situations turn violent. That is illegal surveillance, Miss Walsh. Stalking. I will document this, and it goes in my report for the court. He bagged the tracker carefully. Evidence of harassment that would undermine every claim her siblings made about being concerned family members. Will it matter? Emma heard the exhaustion in her own voice. Will any of this matter in court? Miss Walsh, I have been sheriff in this county for 20 years. Whitaker's voice was firm, certain. I knew Thomas Bennett, knew what kind of man he was. If he left you this property, it was because he saw something in you worth protecting. And this community tends to protect what Thomas valued. Anything happens, anything at all, you call me directly. He handed her a card with his personal cell number written on the back, day or night. The next weeks blurred together in a haze of legal preparation and mounting dread. Patricia worked with ruthless efficiency, building Emma's case piece by piece, like constructing a wall that could withstand siege. Robert deposed witnesses, gathered evidence, crafted arguments that would dismantle every claim her siblings made. But the strain showed in Emma's face, in the way she could not sleep more than a few hours at a time, in how she would check on Sophie 3 times a night to make sure she was still there, still safe, still theirs. Cedar Falls closed ranks around them in ways that surprised Emma daily. The owner of the general store delivered supplies and refused payment, said Thomas had helped him once when the bank tried to foreclose and he remembered. The mechanic serviced the Honda for free, replaced the oil and fixed a transmission leak Emma had not known existed, said his daughter had been in Sophie's class and any kid who could handle what Sophie had handled deserved adults who showed up. Margaret organized a rotating schedule of people who would drive by the cabin once a day, not intrusively, but just to make sure everything was okay. A quiet surveillance that said, we are watching and we care. The local doctor examined Sophie and wrote a detailed report about her excellent health, her advanced reading level for her age, her emotional stability despite recent hardships. People Emma had never met showed up at the courthouse to file statements supporting her. Their presence a statement about what mattered in small towns where everyone knew your business, but that also meant they had your back when outsiders tried to tear you down. James Crawford came by twice a week, always with some excuse about checking the solar panels or making sure the wood stove was drawing properly, but really just making sure Emma and Sophie were okay. He brought firewood he had split himself, showed Sophie how to identify different trees by their bark, taught Emma how to adjust the damper for maximum heat efficiency. He did not ask about the legal battle, did not offer advice she had not requested, just made himself useful in the quiet way that mattered more than words. You doing all right? He asked one evening as they stood on the porch watching Sophie chase fireflies in the clearing, the first ones of early summer, blinking like stars that had fallen to earth. I am terrified. Emma surprised herself with the honesty. They are going to drag me through court and make me prove I am fit to be a mother, fit to manage money, fit to exist. And I do not know if I can do it. Thomas thought you could. James's voice was quiet but certain. He watched you for years, Emma. Watched you handle your father's death and your divorce and raising Sophie alone. He saw you at your worst and decided you were worth $265 million. That is not a mistake a man like Thomas makes. What if he was wrong? Then we will deal with it when it comes. James met her eyes in the fading light. But I do not think he was wrong. And I do not think you give yourself enough credit for what you have already survived. David called 2 weeks before the court date, his voice tentative and ashamed in a way that suggested he had been working up courage for days. Emma almost did not answer, almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won out over anger and she picked up on the 4th ring. Emma, I am out. David's words came fast, tumbling over each other like he was afraid if he stopped, he would not start again. I told them I will not be part of this. I withdrew my name from the petition. Why now? Emma heard the bitterness in her voice and did not try to hide it. Why not before they broke into my home? Because I finally realized what we did to you. What I did. David's voice cracked. I took your money and convinced myself I deserved it because I am your brother. Because family helps family. But I did not deserve it. None of us did. We stole from you and then blamed you when there was nothing left to steal. The silence stretched between them, years of hurt and betrayal compressed into seconds of dead air. Thomas saw that, David continued. He knew what we were. That is why he left everything to you and not us. What do you want me to say? Nothing. I do not want anything. I just wanted you to know that at least one of your siblings finally woke up. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But I wanted you to know. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a warning that made Emma's stomach clench. And Emma, Mijar, and Elham. The others are not going to stop. Victoria borrowed money to pay for the lawyers. Marcus is convinced this is their big payday. They are desperate now, and desperate people do stupid, dangerous things. Please be careful. Emma hung up and told Sophie what David had said, and her daughter looked thoughtful in that way she had that made her seem older than 9, wiser than someone who should still believe in fairy tales and happy endings. Do you think he means it? I do not know, baby. Emma wrapped her arm around Sophie's shoulders. People say a lot of things, but he is not fighting us anymore, and that is something. Yeah, Sophie went back to her drawing, adding another house to her notebook. That is something. The night before the court hearing, Patricia arrived with something she had found during discovery, a small fireproof safe hidden in Thomas's workshop that had required a combination Sophie figured out from dates on his war medals. Inside was the VHS tape Thomas had recorded, the one Emma had not yet watched but knew existed from his letter, and a key to a safety deposit box in Helena. The letter was brief, Thomas's handwriting shakier than in earlier documents, dated just weeks before his death. If you are watching this, you found everything, and the wolves have arrived. I recorded this knowing exactly what would happen. Watch it. Show it in court if necessary. They will not be expecting it. They found an old VCR player in the attic, hooked it to a small television Thomas had apparently kept for weather reports, and pressed play. The image that filled the screen was Thomas himself, maybe 69 years old based on the date stamp, sitting at the desk in the vault surrounded by his collection. His voice was steady and clear, the voice of someone who had made peace with mortality and wanted to make sure the truth outlived him. My name is Thomas James Bennett. Today is September 3rd, 1994. I am of sound mind and body, as will be attested by my doctor and attorney, whose contact information is in the safe with this tape. I am recording this because I know what is coming after my death. I have observed Emma Walsh's siblings for years now, watched them at family gatherings, seen their character or the complete absence of it. They will take every dollar she has. They will abandon her when the money runs out. And when they learn about this inheritance, they will return with lawyers and lies and accusations designed to take what I have given her. Thomas looked directly at the camera, his eyes sharp and certain despite his age, and Emma felt like he was looking through time directly at her. Let me be clear for any court that reviews this recording. I am a veteran of the Vietnam War. I worked as an accountant for 6 years. I built this collection over 37 years with full mental capacity and clear intentions. I was evaluated by doctors regularly, and I understood exactly what I was doing with every purchase, every investment, every decision. This collection represents my life's work, and it is mine to give to whomever I choose. I choose Emma Walsh and her daughter Sophie. No one else. Not because they are my closest blood relatives, because they are not, but because Emma has demonstrated over years of observation that she possesses the character necessary to be trusted with wealth. She gives without keeping score. She maintains her integrity under pressure. She protects those weaker than herself at cost to her own comfort. These are the qualities that matter. To Emma and Sophie, if you are watching this, stand firm. You deserve this. Do not let them take what I meant for you. I am proud to have family like you, even if we barely knew each other in life. Blood does not make family. Character does. The tape ended, static filling the screen, and Emma sat frozen with tears streaming down her face while Sophie pressed against her side. Thomas had known 20 years before it happened. He had known everything, had predicted their exact moves, had left evidence that would destroy their case in court. He had protected her from beyond the grave with the same meticulous care he had used to build his collection, and Sarah felt the weight of that protection like an anchor, keeping her steady against the storm her siblings had brought. Patricia rewound the tape carefully, her expression satisfied in the way of lawyers who have just been handed an unbeatable piece of evidence. This is devastating for their case, Emma, absolutely devastating. But we have to be strategic about when we reveal it. We do not show our hand until they have committed to their story, until they have painted themselves into a corner they cannot escape. Then we show the judge what Thomas predicted and watch their case collapse. When Emma's voice was rough from crying. When they think they are winning, Patricia's smile was sharp enough to cut. When Victoria is confident, when Marcus is smug, when they have spent days telling the court how incompetent you are. Then we show them who Thomas really was and what he really thought of them. We let them destroy their own credibility before we prove they were lying about everything. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke after midnight, rain hammering the metal roof and wind howling through the canyon like something alive and angry. Emma lay awake listening to it, Sophie asleep in the next room, and tried to prepare herself for what tomorrow would bring. The courtroom, the judge, her siblings' lawyer tearing apart her life for public consumption. The very real possibility that despite everything, despite Thomas's gift and Patricia's preparation and the community's support, she might lose. Not the money, though that would hurt, but Sophie. That was the threat that cut deepest. Victoria's vicious suggestion that Emma was an unfit mother, that living in a car constituted child neglect, that a judge might decide Sophie deserved better. The idea of losing her daughter, of supervised visitation and court-ordered separation, made Emma's chest constrict with panic that bordered on physical pain. But she had been afraid before, had survived worse than a courtroom battle, had kept herself and her daughter alive and together through 2 years of homelessness that should have broken them both. She had learned to fix things with her hands, to make food stretch, to maintain hope, when everything logical said hope was foolish. She had learned that character was not about never falling down, but about getting back up when you did, about refusing to quit, even when quitting would be easier. And Thomas, who had watched her from a distance for years, had seen that, had believed she was strong enough to protect what he had given her, had trusted her with not just wealth, but with proving that sometimes, rarely, impossibly, good people won. Thunder rolled across the mountains and lightning lit up the bedroom in stark white flashes. Emma got up, checked on Sophie one more time, found her daughter sleeping peacefully with her stuffed rabbit and her notebook full of drawings of houses with 3 figures holding hands. She stood in the doorway and made a promise to Thomas Bennett, to herself, to her daughter, who deserved better than what the world had tried to give her. Tomorrow they would walk into that courthouse and face her siblings' cruelty with evidence and truth and the strength that came from being people Thomas had believed were worth saving. And they would win. Not because justice was guaranteed, because it was not. Not because the system protected people like them, because it did not. But because giving up had never been an option, and Emma Walsh had survived too much to break now. The mountains stood watch through the storm, patient and eternal, keeping secrets that went deeper than vaults and stretched further back than memory. And somewhere in the bedrock beneath the cabin, in a chamber built to last centuries, Thomas Bennett's collection waited to be claimed by the woman he had chosen across time and distance to be its guardian. The woman who had passed every test he had set without knowing she was being tested. The woman who had proven that character mattered more than blood, and that sometimes the best family was the one you built yourself from broken pieces and stubborn hope. The Jefferson County Courthouse had stood since 1923, its stone columns weathered by decades of Montana winters, its halls echoing with the accumulated weight of every dispute that had passed through these rooms. Emma walked up the steps at 8:30 on a Thursday morning, Sophie's hand tight in hers, Patricia Morgan and Robert Kane flanking them like shields against what was coming. The sky threatened snow, despite it being only early autumn, clouds hanging low and gray over the mountains that ringed Helena on all sides. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed with that particular frequency that made everything feel slightly unreal, and the air smelled of old wood and floor wax and the tension that came from families tearing each other apart in public. Victoria stood near the water fountain, navy suit perfectly tailored, hair styled like she was about to close a $1 million sale rather than try to steal one from her sister. Marcus paced by the windows, his tie slightly crooked, face already flushed with the anger that seemed to be his permanent state these days. Claire sat on a bench, hands folded, eyes downcast, playing the role of concerned family member with practiced precision. David's absence felt deliberate, a statement he had made with his feet rather than his words. And Emma felt a small measure of gratitude that at least one sibling had found enough conscience to step away from this ugliness. Gerald Thorne conferred with 2 associates near the courtroom doors, all of them carrying briefcases thick with documents designed to paint Emma as incompetent and desperate and dangerous to her own child. When Victoria spotted them, her expression shifted from worried concern to something harder, calculating, the mask she wore slipping just enough that Emma could see the resentment underneath. They did not approach each other, did not speak, just stood on opposite ends of the hallway like armies waiting for the battle to begin. And Emma felt Sophie press closer against her side, small and warm and frightened in a way that made Emma's protective instincts flare hot and fierce. Cedar Falls residents arrived in a steady stream, filling the public benches with quiet solidarity. Margaret Sullivan with her folder of clippings, Sheriff Whitaker in full uniform, his presence a statement about who the law was actually here to protect, the general store owner and the mechanic and the doctor who had examined Sophie. Sister Agnes had made the 3-hour drive from Tacoma, her presence a reminder of where Emma had started and how far she had come. They formed a wall of witnesses to character, to resilience, to the difference between people who talked about family and people who actually showed up when it mattered. Judge Eleanor Pierce entered at 9 sharp, black robe crisp, silver hair pulled back in a bun so tight it seemed to pull her features into sharper focus. She was early 60s with the bearing of someone who had presided over enough custody battles and estate disputes to have developed immunity to manipulation. The bailiff called the court to order and everyone stood, then sat, then waited while the judge arranged papers and surveyed the room with eyes that missed nothing. Case number 74-92, petition for guardianship of Emma Walsh in custody of minor child Sophie Walsh. The judge's voice carried the weight of authority earned over decades. Mr. Thorne, you filed the petition. Present your case. Gerald Thorne stood, smoothing his expensive suit with hands that had probably never known manual labor, and began his performance. His voice carried practiced concern as he outlined his client's worries about Emma's history of homelessness, her lack of financial management experience, the remote cabin unsuitable for a child. He presented bank records showing evictions and employment gaps, the systematic pattern of what he called poor judgment. He painted a picture of a desperate woman who had stumbled into wealth beyond her capacity to manage, who needed family intervention before disaster struck. Marcus testified with false concern that might have been convincing if Emma had not known him her entire life, had not seen him lie to their father about where money went and to his wife about where he spent his evenings. He described years of watching his sister struggle, of trying to help only to be rebuffed, of growing alarm at her choices. The rewriting of history was breathtaking in its audacity, transforming him from thief and abandoner into long-suffering brother exhausted by Emma's poor judgment, erasing completely the stolen insurance money and the GPS tracker found on her car. Victoria followed, her real estate training evident in every calculated word, every pause timed for maximum impact. She spoke of relief when she heard about the inheritance, then worry when she learned about the isolated cabin, then deep concern about Emma managing hundreds of millions without expertise or support. Her performance was polished, believable, the concerned older sister who just wanted to protect her family, and Emma watched jurors taking notes and wondered if they could see through the veneer to the greed underneath. Claire's testimony hit softer notes, more manipulative in its gentleness than Victoria's sharp edges. She spoke about trauma to damaging judgment, about loving her niece enough to intervene, about wanting both Emma and Sophie to be safe. Her voice caught at strategic moments, tears appearing on cue. The worried aunt painted in pastels rather than Victoria's bold strokes. Emma felt sick watching it, this performance designed to steal her daughter, and had to remind herself that Patricia and Robert had prepared for this, that they had evidence that would cut through the lies. Judge Pierce took notes throughout, her expression unreadable, a lifetime of hearing people lie under oath having taught her to reveal nothing until she was ready. When Thorne rested his case, she looked at Robert Kane with eyes that had seen this play before and were waiting to see if this time would be different. Defense may proceed. Robert stood and his opening was like a scalpel, precise and cutting and designed to draw blood. Your Honor, this is not about protecting vulnerable people. This is about adult children who stole from their mother, abandoned her when she needed help, and now want access to money they have no legal right to. Let me show you exactly what kind of family we are dealing with. The evidence came methodically, each piece building on the last like constructing a wall brick by brick. Bank records showing the systematic theft of $87,000. Every withdrawal and transfer documented with dates and amounts that could not be disputed. Text messages and emails where Emma had asked for repayment and been ignored or blocked. The digital trail of betrayal laid out in blue bubbles and red receipts. Sheriff Whitaker's report documenting the GPS tracker, proving harassment and stalking that undermined every claim about being concerned family members. Medical evaluations from two independent psychologists confirming Emma's complete mental competency, her remarkable resilience under circumstances that would have broken many people. Character witnesses from Cedar Falls testifying to her capability and Sophie's well-being, painting a picture so different from the one Thorne had presented that they seemed to be describing different people entirely. Sister Agnes's testimony particularly cut through the courtroom's tension like a knife through fog. Her voice was steady and certain as she described Emma at 19, fleeing domestic violence with an infant, working 2 jobs while attending nursing school, giving back to help other women even after she had moved into her own place. When she came back to us 2 years ago, she did not ask for handouts. She asked for an address so she could apply for jobs. She maintained her daughter's school attendance, her health, her hope. I have seen hundreds of mothers come through our doors, and Emma Walsh is one of the strongest, most capable women I have ever known. Sister Agnes looked directly at Victoria and Marcus, her expression carrying the moral authority of someone who had spent 50 years helping people the world had discarded. Using her past vulnerability as evidence of incompetence is not just wrong. It is obscene. You should be ashamed of yourselves. Margaret Sullivan brought her folder of clippings, explaining Thomas's remarkable foresight, his decades of careful observation, his deliberate choice of Emma as his heir. Thomas told me once that Emma was the kind of person who gave without keeping score and that such people deserved to be protected from those who only knew how to take. He knew what her siblings were. That is why he chose her. When Robert rested his case, Judge Pierce leaned forward slightly, her attention shifting from lawyers to the people at the center of this storm. I would like to hear from Miss Walsh herself, and from Sophie if she is willing to speak. Emma approached the witness stand with legs that wanted to buckle but refused to, taking the oath with a voice that stayed steady through force of will and decades of nursing training that had taught her how to function under pressure. She met the judge's eyes directly, refusing to look away, refusing to show the fear that was trying to claw its way up her throat. The questions came gently but probed deep, each one designed to reveal character or its absence. Why had she been homeless? What had happened with the insurance money? How was she managing the inheritance? What were her plans for Sophie's future? Emma answered each one honestly, not hiding the hard parts, not pretending she had not struggled, but also not accepting the narrative that her homelessness was evidence of failure rather than circumstances beyond her control. Yes, she had lived in her car. Yes, she had been evicted when she could not make rent after her siblings took the money they had promised to repay. Yes, the past 2 years had been brutal, but she had kept Sophie safe, enrolled in school, fed and clothed and loved. She had never stopped looking for work, never stopped trying, never given up even when everything logical said giving up was the only reasonable response. Your siblings claim you lack the capacity to manage Mr. Bennett's estate. The judge's voice was neutral, revealing nothing. What do you say to that? Ada, I say they are wrong. Emma's voice was clear, certain. I have been learning about the collection, working with attorneys and financial advisors who specialize in exactly this kind of estate. I am not trying to manage it alone. I am building a team of experts who can guide me. But I am the trustee because that is what Thomas wanted, and I am going to honor his wishes. And their concerns about Sophie's living conditions? The cabin has everything we need. Emma felt passion creeping into her voice and did not try to hide it. Solar power, well water, heat from the wood stove. Sophie has her own room for the first time in her life. She is healthier than she has been in years. We are not isolated. Cedar Falls is 5 miles away. Helena is an hour. Medical care is accessible. We are not living in poverty anymore. We are living in peace. Judge Pierce nodded, her expression giving away nothing, then turned her attention to Sophie. Miss Walsh, I know you are only 9 years old and this must be scary, but I would like to hear from you if you are comfortable speaking. Sophie stood, walked to the witness stand with her chin up and shoulders back, and Emma felt pride so fierce it bordered on pain. Her daughter, brave and small and absolutely unshakable, facing down adults who wanted to tear their family apart and refusing to be intimidated. The bailiff brought a box for Sophie to stand on so she could reach the microphone, and the gesture was both practical and somehow made everything more heartbreaking. This visual reminder of how young she was to be fighting this battle. Sophie, do you understand why we are here today? Yes, ma'am. Sophie's voice was clear, steady. My aunts and uncles want to take our house and say my mom cannot take care of me. Tell me about living with your mother. What is that like? Sophie's voice carried a tremor underneath the steadiness, fear and anger mixing with love so deep it seemed to fill the courtroom. My mom is the strongest person I know. When we lived in the Cayenne, she always made sure I ate first, even when that meant she did not eat. She walked me to school every day and helped me with homework at the library. She never made me feel like being poor was my fault or like we were less than other people. She kept me safe. And now at the cabin, now we have a home. Sophie's voice brightened despite the circumstances. I have my own room with a window that looks at mountains. I go to school in Cedar Falls, and I am doing really good in all my subjects. We have friends who visit us. Mom taught me how to chop wood and pump water and do things with my own hands. I am learning stuff I never could have learned in the city. Do you feel safe with your mother? Yes, ma'am, always. Sophie's answer came without hesitation. Even when we did not have anywhere to live, I always felt safe because Mom was there. Your aunts and uncles say they are worried about you. What do you think about that? Sophie's jaw set in a way that made her look exactly like Emma when Emma had decided something was worth fighting for. That genetic inheritance of stubbornness that had kept them both alive through circumstances that should have broken them. I think they were not worried when we were living in the parking lot. They were not worried when Mom called asking for help and they would not answer. They are only worried now because Great Uncle Thomas left us money and they want it. But it is not theirs. He left it to us because Mom is a good person who deserves good things. Sophie pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, the edges worn like she had been carrying it for weeks, touching it for comfort or courage, or both. Great Uncle Thomas left me a letter. He wrote it before I was born, before he even knew I would exist. He said I was brave. He said Mom was a good person. He said I should protect her because she had spent her whole life protecting me. She handed the letter to the bailiff who passed it to the judge, and the courtroom was absolutely silent while Judge Pierce read, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to something softer, almost sad as she absorbed words written by a dead man who had seen this moment coming from 20 years away. When she finished, she looked at Victoria and Marcus and Claire with eyes that had seen through their performance to the hollowness underneath. Mr. Kane, do you have anything further? Patricia Morgan stood and approached with a television on a rolling cart, the ancient VCR player already loaded with the tape that would change everything. Your Honor, Thomas Bennett recorded this 6 months before his death. He left specific instructions that it should only be shown if his heirs faced legal challenges from family members. The tape played and Thomas's face filled the screen, recorded in the vault surrounded by his collection, his voice steady and certain as he documented his mental capacity and intentions. He spoke of watching Emma's siblings for years, of seeing their character or the complete absence of it, of predicting with eerie accuracy exactly what they would do when they learned about the inheritance. He spoke of Emma with respect and admiration, of Sophie with hope for her future, of the collection he had built over 37 years and his absolute certainty about who deserved it. I have watched them for decades. Thomas looked directly into the camera, and his eyes seemed to look through time into the courtroom where his predictions were being proven accurate. They take, she gives. That is the difference. This collection is mine to give, and I give it to Emma Walsh and her daughter Sophie. No one else, not because of blood, but because of character. Blood does not make family. Character does. The screen went to static and Judge Pierce sat back, silent for a long moment that stretched until it felt like the air itself might crack under the pressure. Then she picked up her gavel and her voice cut through the tension with surgical precision. I have heard testimony from professionals, from community members, from the parent and child at the center of this case. But perhaps the most powerful evidence is this child's testimony and her great-uncle's extraordinary foresight. She looked at Victoria and Marcus and Claire with an expression that could have frozen water. You stole from your sister. You abandoned her and your own niece when they needed you most. Yet somehow a woman you claim is incompetent managed to keep a child safe, educated, and emotionally healthy through circumstances that would have broken many people. And you have the audacity to claim she lacks judgment. Victoria started to speak, but the judge's look silenced her like a door slamming shut. Petition for guardianship is denied. The gavel came down hard enough that Emma felt the sound in her chest. Furthermore, petitioners are ordered to pay all legal fees incurred by Emma Walsh in defending against this frivolous action. Any further harassment will result in restraining orders and potential criminal charges. This court finds Emma Walsh to be a competent, capable parent who is more than qualified to manage her inheritance and raise her daughter. Case dismissed. The Cedar Falls contingent erupted in quiet applause that the bailiff did not try to stop, and Emma pulled Sophie into her arms and felt her daughter shaking with relief and residual fear and something like triumph. They had won. Thomas's protection had held. The wall he had built around them from beyond the grave had proven stronger than greed, stronger than betrayal, strong enough to withstand everything her siblings had thrown at them. Victoria stood frozen, her carefully constructed case shattered around her like broken glass. Marcus's face went from red to white, the color draining away as the reality of what had just happened sank in. Claire was crying, but whether from guilt or frustration, Emma could not tell and did not care. Gerald Thorne gathered his papers quickly, already distancing himself from clients who had just been publicly humiliated and ordered to pay the other side's legal fees. Outside the courthouse, snow had started falling, fat flakes drifting down to melt on stone steps that had seen a century of victories and defeats, of justice served and justice denied. Emma held Sophie tight and felt, for the first time in years, solid ground under her feet. They had fought and won. The battle Thomas Bennett had prepared them for from beyond the grave was over, and they were still standing, still together, still a family bound not by blood but by choice and character, and the kind of love that survived parking lots and courtrooms and every attempt to tear it apart. Patricia and Robert stood with them, confirming next steps, but Emma barely heard them. She was too focused on the feeling of her daughter in her arms, of snow on her face, of mountains in the distance, standing eternal watch over a valley where justice had been served. Harold Chen appeared from somewhere inside the courthouse, his weathered face creased with satisfaction, and shook Emma's hand with the firm grip of someone who had just won a battle he had been planning for years. Thomas would be proud. Chen's voice was quiet but certain. He knew you could do this. I almost did not believe him, but you did it anyway, and that is what mattered. James Crawford was waiting by his truck in the parking lot, having apparently driven down from Cedar Falls to be there even though Emma had not asked him to come. He did not say anything, just nodded once when he caught her eye, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement that meant more than words could have. Emma nodded back, understanding passing between them without need for explanation. The drive back to the cabin took 2 hours through falling snow that was starting to stick, transforming the landscape into something clean and new. Sophie fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the emotional toll of the day, and Emma drove in silence while Patricia reviewed the judge's ruling and Robert made notes about next steps for the estate management. But Emma was not thinking about money or legal strategies or what came next. She was thinking about Thomas Bennett sitting in his vault 20 years ago, recording a message for people he would never meet, protecting them from threats he could only predict but not prevent. She was thinking about Sister Agnes driving 3 hours to testify, about Margaret Sullivan keeping clippings for years without knowing why, about James Crawford showing up without being asked because that was what you did for people who mattered. She was thinking about family, real family, the kind you built from broken pieces and stubborn hope, and people who showed up when showing up was hard. Victoria and Marcus and Claire had proven that blood meant nothing without character to back it up, that you could share genetics and still be strangers, still be enemies, still be willing to destroy someone for money you did not need and did not deserve. But Thomas had proven the opposite, that you could be strangers by blood and still be family by choice, that watching someone from a distance for years could teach you more about their character than a lifetime of obligatory gatherings, that sometimes the best thing you could leave behind was not money but the validation that came from someone seeing you and deciding you were worth saving. The cabin appeared through the snow like something out of a fairy tale. Smoke rising from the chimney where Emma had banked the fire that morning, solar panels on the roof dusted with white, mountains behind it barely visible through the falling flakes. Patricia and Robert would stay in Helena tonight, start the paperwork tomorrow for the trust that would protect Thomas's gift for generations. But for now, Emma just wanted to be home with her daughter in the place Thomas had built and left for them. She carried Sophie inside, this 9-year-old warrior who had stood in front of a judge and defended her mother with the kind of courage that came from knowing you were right and refusing to back down. She tucked her into bed under quilts Thomas had made or bought decades ago, heavy and warm, and watched her sleep for a long moment before going back downstairs. The cabin was quiet except for the crackle of the fire and the soft sound of snow against the windows. Emma stood in the kitchen where Thomas must have stood thousands of times, looking out at mountains that had witnessed his entire Montana life, and felt the weight of what had happened settle into her bones. They had won. The battle was over. Sophie was safe, and the inheritance was secure, and her siblings had been exposed for what they were. But the victory felt complicated, tinged with grief for the family that could have been but never was, for the siblings who could have chosen differently but did not, for the years of hurt that could not be undone no matter how many court cases she won. David had withdrawn, had found some measure of conscience at the end, but the others had fought to the bitter finish and lost and would probably hate her forever for it. Emma pulled out Thomas's letter and read it again in the firelight, his precise handwriting spelling out words that had sustained her through the darkest moments of preparation. Stand firm, you deserve this. Do not let them take what I meant for you. She had stood firm and she had won, and Thomas had been right about everything, had seen her character from a distance, and decided it was worth $265 million of validation. She thought about what came next, about the trust Patricia would establish, and the experts they would hire, and the careful management of a collection that represented decades of patient genius. She thought about Sophie growing up here with mountains outside her window and space to run, and a future that was not defined by parking lots and poverty. She thought about using Thomas's gift the way he had intended, not just for themselves but for others who needed the kind of second chance he had given her. But mostly she thought about the man himself, this Vietnam veteran who had come back from war and built a life of solitude and purpose in the Montana wilderness, who had watched his nephew's family from a distance and seen what others missed, who had planned for decades with the kind of strategic thinking that came from military training and accountant precision, who had died alone in this cabin but had made sure he would not be forgotten, that his legacy would live on through people he barely knew but had decided to trust. Thank you. Emma spoke the words aloud to the empty room, to the ghost of Thomas Bennett, if he was listening, to the mountains and the snow and the fire that kept them warm. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for believing in me when I had stopped believing in myself. Thank you for giving Sophie a childhood worth having. I will not waste this gift. I promise you that. The fire crackled in response and the snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the bedrock beneath her feet, in a vault built to last centuries, Thomas Bennett's collection waited to change the world in ways he had planned but would never see. His war had ended in 1968, but his final mission had succeeded beyond what even he could have imagined, proving that character outlasted blood, and that sometimes the best revenge against cruelty was simply refusing to become cruel yourself. Emma Walsh had survived 2 years in a Honda Civic in a courtroom battle that could have destroyed her, and she had done it without compromising the qualities that had made Thomas choose her in the first place. She had given without keeping score, had maintained her integrity under pressure, had protected those weaker than herself at cost to her own comfort. And in doing so, she had proven that his faith was not misplaced, that good people could win sometimes, that character mattered more than genetics or money or anything else the world tried to tell you defined your worth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new ways to honor the gift she had been given. But tonight she was just a mother whose daughter was safe, a woman whose home was secure, a person who had been seen and valued and trusted by someone who understood what truly mattered. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The weeks following the courtroom victory revealed a cost that Emma had not anticipated. Her hands shook when she tried to sleep, her body unable to accept that the threat had passed, that her siblings could not reach them anymore, that the law had actually protected the people who deserve protection. Migraines came in waves that blurred her vision and sent her to dark rooms with cold cloths pressed against her forehead. Stress manifesting physically in ways that required medication and therapy she could finally afford. The doctor in Helena was patient and kind, a woman in her 60s who had seen enough trauma cases to recognize the signs. Your body kept you alive through the crisis by flooding you with adrenaline and cortisol. Now that the crisis is over, you are experiencing the crash. It is normal. It does not mean you are weak. It means you are human. Emma went to appointments every Thursday, let herself cry in offices designed for exactly that purpose, and slowly learned that peace did not have to be temporary, that safety could last longer than a night in a parking lot, that the hypervigilance that had kept her and Sophie alive for 2 years could finally be allowed to rest. The healing was not linear or easy, but it was happening, cell by cell, breath by breath, day by day. The foundation planning gave her something constructive to focus on, a way of turning pain into purpose that felt like honoring Thomas's gift rather than simply spending it. Patricia helped structure everything properly, a trust that would generate income indefinitely while protecting the principal, guidelines for how funds could be used, oversight that would ensure Thomas's legacy continued helping people long after Emma was gone. They sold portions of the art collection through Christie's and Sotheby's, each piece finding a home in museums or private collections where it would be preserved and appreciated. The Bierstadt landscape that had been bought for $375 in 1963 sold for $2.1 million and went to the Museum of Western Art in Denver. The first edition Shakespeare folio found its way to the Library of Congress for $340,000. Andrew Wyeth's painting of a farmhouse in winter went to the Portland Art Museum for $890,000. Each sale generated millions that flowed into the foundation's endowment, Thomas's patient acquisitions becoming Emma's patient giving, wealth carefully accumulated over decades being carefully distributed over what she hoped would be centuries. They kept some pieces, the ones with sentimental value or personal meaning. Thomas's photograph from Vietnam stayed on the mantle. The bronze horse sculpture remained in the main room where light from the windows could play across his patina. The hand-colored map from 1702 hung in the hallway where Sophie could study it and imagine worlds that no longer existed. James Crawford appeared 3 months after the court battle, his truck pulling up the dirt road on a morning when early spring was just starting to touch the high country. He had been coming by less frequently since the trial, giving Emma space to heal. But Harold Chen had asked him to take a look at building plans for something ambitious, something that would require his expertise and months of work if Emma decided to move forward. The community center plans were spread across Thomas's desk when Emma invited James inside. Architectural drawings that showed a timber structure adjacent to the cabin, beautiful and functional, designed to honor the forest while providing space for the work Emma wanted to do. Legal aid offices, job training classrooms, counseling rooms, a commercial kitchen for teaching cooking skills. 12 tiny homes on the property where women could live while they rebuilt their lives. This is a big project. James studied the plans with the eye of someone who understood construction from foundation to roof peak. 6 months of work minimum, maybe closer to a year depending on weather and how many crew I can bring in. It is going to be expensive. I have expensive covered. Emma smiled, the first real smile she had managed in weeks. What I need to know is if it is possible. It is possible. James looked up from the plans and met her eyes. Thomas built this cabin to last centuries. We can build something next to it that will last just as long. The question is whether you are ready for what comes after. What do you mean? Once you build it, people will come. Women who need help, children who need stability, families who are one paycheck away from homelessness. You are going to see yourself in them over and over, and it is going to hurt every single time. His voice was gentle but honest. Building the center is the easy part. Running it, keeping your heart open when it wants to close to protect itself. That is the hard part. I know. Emma thought about the women at St. Catherine's shelter, the ones who had been cycling through for years, still stuck, still fighting. I have been them. I know what it feels like to be invisible, to have people look through you like you do not exist. If I can change that for even one person, it will be worth it. Then we will build it. James rolled up the plans with careful hands. I will put together a crew. We start in May when the ground thaws. He stayed longer than necessary that day, helping Emma replace rotted boards on the porch, showing Sophie how to identify different types of wood by their grain, talking about nothing important in the way that was actually deeply important because it meant he was choosing to be there. When he left, Emma watched his truck disappear down the road and felt something shift inside her chest. Something that might have been hope or might have been the beginning of trust in a future that included more than just survival. The Thomas Bennett Foundation for Single Mothers opened its doors 18 months after the court victory. The community center sat adjacent to the cabin, a beautiful timber structure that James and his crew had built with the same care Thomas had used on the original cabin 60 years earlier. The main building held offices for social workers and lawyers who specialized in family law, classrooms for job training and GED preparation, counseling rooms designed to feel safe rather than institutional, and a commercial kitchen that smelled of bread and possibility. The 12 tiny homes dotted the property like satellites around a mothership, each one a sanctuary where women could live rent-free while they attended training programs or saved money or healed from whatever had broken them. They were small but well-built, solar-powered like the main cabin, each with a bathroom and kitchenette and space for children to sleep safely. Emma hired carefully, looking for people who understood that trauma required patience and that helping someone required seeing them as a person rather than a problem to be solved. The social workers were experienced but not cynical, the lawyers fierce but not hardened, the job trainers skilled but willing to repeat lessons as many times as necessary. They built a team that believed in second chances because most of them had needed second chances themselves. The hotline went live on a Monday morning, and by Friday they had received 143 calls. Not all needed housing, but all needed someone to listen, someone to believe them, someone to help them navigate systems designed to be confusing. They helped with restraining orders and custody arrangements and landlord disputes and job applications. They taught budgeting and cooking and how to change a tire and 100 other skills that seemed simple until you had never been taught them. The scholarships program funded women returning to school, covering tuition and living expenses and childcare for mothers who wanted to become nurses or teachers or accountants or tradespeople. The first cohort included 18 women ranging from 19 to 52, and Emma interviewed each one personally, seeing herself in their hope, in their fear, and their determination not to waste this chance. Sophie turned 14 the autumn after the foundation opened, taller and more confident, but still carrying that notebook everywhere, still drawing houses, though now they were real houses. The tiny homes on the property rendered in careful detail with the residents' names written below. She had started helping with the youth programs, teaching younger children how to read or do math, or just listening when they needed someone to understand what it felt like to be hungry or scared or ashamed. The girl who had testified in court at 9 with her chin up and her voice steady had grown into a young woman who understood that strength came from surviving hard things and using that survival to help others survive too. She had straight A's at the high school in Cedar Falls, friends who came to the cabin for sleepovers and movie nights, a future that stretched ahead, unlimited and bright. On a Friday afternoon in late October, Emma found Sophie sitting on the porch steps with a woman maybe 30 years old and a little boy around 4, both of them new arrivals to the tiny homes. Sophie was showing the boy how to identify birds by their calls, patient and gentle, while his mother watched with an expression Emma recognized from mirrors, that particular exhaustion that came from carrying too much for too long. "Your daughter is wonderful," the woman said when she noticed Emma, "so kind to strangers. She has been where you are." Emma sat down on the steps beside them. "We both have. We know what it feels like." The woman's eyes filled with tears she was too tired to hide. "I left him 3 weeks ago. Took Jason and got on a bus and came here because someone told me there was a place that helped. I did not believe it until I got here. It is real." Emma put her hand on the woman's shoulder, the kind of touch that said, "I see you and you matter and you are going to be okay. And you are going to be okay. It does not feel like it now, but you are going to survive this and it is going to make you stronger." "How do you know?" "Because I did, and if I can do it, anyone can." 6 years after that November morning when Emma and Sophie had first walked into Thomas Bennett's cabin, over 200 people gathered for the Memorial Garden dedication. The garden spread across half an acre, native plants chosen for their resilience and beauty, stone paths winding between beds of wildflowers and ornamental grasses, benches for reflection placed where you could see the mountains in the distance. At its center stood a monument carved from Montana granite, Thomas's words cut deep enough to last centuries. "In a world of takers, remain givers. In a time of greed, maintain integrity. Build something that outlasts you. Below that, his dates of birth and death, and below that, a simple phrase. He saw what others missed. He protected what mattered. He built what endures. Sophie stood at the podium in front of the crowd, 14 years old and poised in a way that made Emma's throat tight with pride. She wore a simple dress and her hair was pulled back, and she looked so much like Emma's father in that moment that Emma had to blink away tears. The notebook was in her hands, worn at the edges from 5 years of constant use, filled with drawings and observations and the careful documentation of a life transformed. 5 years ago, my mom and I were living in a car. Sophie's voice carried clear and strong across the gathering. We had nothing except each other. My aunts and uncles had taken everything we had, and when they tried to take this too, they told a judge my mom was not capable. They were wrong. She paused, looking out at the crowd, at the women from the tiny homes and the staff who kept the foundation running, and the people from Cedar Falls who had shown up because that was what you did for your own. My mom took what Uncle Thomas gave us, not just money, but trust, the belief that we deserve better, and she built this. A place where other moms and kids like us can find safety, because we remember what it felt like to be invisible, to be told we did not matter. Her eyes found Emma standing with James at the garden's edge, his arm around her shoulders in the casual way of people who had built something together over years of patient work. Uncle Thomas wrote me a letter before I was born. He said to protect my mom because she had spent her whole life protecting me. But the truth is, we protect each other. That is what family means. Not blood, but who shows up when things get hard and stays when they get harder. Sophie's gaze swept across the crowd, landing on faces Emma recognized from intake appointments, in counseling sessions, in graduation ceremonies. Women who had arrived broken and were learning to be whole again. We are here to tell every one of you that you matter. You are worth fighting for. You deserve good things. Because if we could make it from a parking lot to here, you can too. The applause rolled across the garden like thunder, and Emma felt James's arm tighten around her shoulders, anchoring her while the emotion threatened to overwhelm. The foundation had helped 847 single mothers in 5 years. Not thousands like some organizations claimed with the inflated numbers, but a real number, achievable and documented and growing steadily. 847 women who had found legal help, housing, job training, hope. 847 children who had stability their parents were fighting to provide. It was not everything. It was not enough to solve homelessness or poverty or the systematic failures that created them. But it was something real and lasting, proof that Thomas's careful planning could ripple forward to change lives he would never see. That one man's decision to believe in character over blood could echo through generations. That evening, after the crowd dispersed and the caterers cleaned up and the sun set purple and gold over the mountains, Emma and Sophie and James sat together on the cabin's porch. The same porch where Emma had stood 5 years ago, fresh from the courthouse, trying to believe that safety could last. The same clearing where Sophie had run that first day, discovering what space felt like after 2 years in a car's back seat. The same mountains Thomas had watched for 37 years, patient and eternal and beautiful. Sophie leaned against Emma's shoulder, 14 but still small enough to fit there, her notebook open to a new drawing. 3 figures stood in front of the community center with people streaming through the doors, mountains rising behind them. The sky impossibly blue and wide. She had titled it What We Built Together, and Emma studied the careful detail her daughter had put into every line, every face, every element of a scene that captured not just what they had accomplished, but what it meant. "Mom, are you happy?" The question caught Emma off guard, made her actually consider rather than giving the automatic response. She carried scars from those years that would probably never fully heal. The hypervigilance that made her check locks twice before bed. The anxiety that spiked when bills arrived, even though she had more money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes. The dreams where she woke up back in the Honda with nowhere to go and no one who cared. But she had Sophie, healthy and brave, and becoming someone remarkable. She had work that turned pain into purpose, that gave meaning to suffering by preventing others from experiencing the same. She had James, steady and kind and understanding about the ways trauma lingered, patient with her healing in the way only someone who had done their own healing could be. She had a home, not just walls and a roof, but the actual feeling of belonging somewhere permanently. Yeah, baby. Emma pulled her daughter closer. I am really happy. Like the kind where you are not waiting for something bad to happen. James squeezed Emma's hand, understanding that particular achievement, knowing how long it took to reach a place where peace felt permanent instead of temporary. They had talked about it late at night when sleep would not come, about the way poverty trained you to expect disaster, to save every penny because you never knew when the bottom would drop out again. Learning to believe in stability took time, required evidence that lasted longer than luck, needed proof that good things could stay rather than just visit briefly before disappearing. Yeah, Emma met her daughter's serious dark eyes, like that kind. They sat together as darkness fell and stars emerged, more stars than seemed possible, scattered across the Montana sky, like promises kept. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke from the stove inside, clean and sharp and entirely different from the exhaust and desperation of Tacoma's parking lots. An owl called from the forest, long and haunting, and something small rustled through the underbrush, hunting or being hunted in the ancient dance that predated human concerns by millennia. Sophie closed her notebook and looked up at the stars, her young face thoughtful in the darkness. Uncle Thomas never got to meet me, but I feel like I know him anyway. How is that? Because of what he built. Sophie's voice carried the wisdom of someone who had learned early that people leave parts of themselves in everything they create. The cabin and the collection and all his careful plans. When I am in the workshop using his tools, or reading in the room he built, or helping someone at the foundation, that is him. That is what he wanted to leave behind. Not just money, but the chance for people to be better than their worst moments. Emma pulled her daughter closer, this wise, observant girl who had survived homelessness with her hope intact, who had testified in court at 9 with courage Emma still marveled at, who was becoming someone who would carry Thomas's legacy forward into futures he had never seen. You know what is amazing? Thomas saw all of this, not the specifics, but the possibility. He looked at us from a distance and decided we were worth believing in. Then he built something that would protect that belief even after he was gone. Do you think he knew it would turn into this, the foundation and everything? I think he hoped we would do something meaningful with it. Emma gestured at the community center, dark except for the security lights, tomorrow's schedule already posted by the door. But I do not think he could have imagined how meaningful. He gave us tools. We are building something with them that honors him. James stood, stretched, offered his hands to pull them both up. Come on, it is getting cold and there is hot chocolate inside with marshmallows. Is there any other kind? Sophie's question was automatic, a ritual they had developed over 5 years of evenings like this, small traditions that built family from repetition and care. They went inside together, leaving the porch and the mountains and the endless stars behind. The cabin wrapped around them with warmth from the wood stove, light from the solar-powered lamps, the accumulated comfort of 5 years of making this space their own. Thomas's journals still lined the shelves, but now Emma's nursing textbooks sat beside them, and Sophie's school awards covered the wall above the desk, and James's carpentry tools hung on hooks he had installed with the same care Thomas had used building everything else. Emma made hot chocolate on the wood stove while Sophie set out mugs, and James built up the fire for the night. The three of them moving around each other with the easy choreography of family, chosen rather than born into, bound by love and respect, and the shared experience of surviving hard things and deciding to build something beautiful from the wreckage. They settled on the couch with quilts Thomas had made decades ago, steam rising from their mugs, the cabin quiet except for the pop and crackle of burning wood. Sophie blew on her hot chocolate and spoke the words Emma had been thinking but had not known how to say. I was thinking about what I said earlier, about people leaving parts of themselves in what they build. Yeah, I think we are doing that too. Not just with the foundation, but here, every time we help someone, every time we show them they matter, we are leaving parts of ourselves. Someday, maybe a long time from now, someone will talk about us the way we talk about Uncle Thomas. They will say, Emma and Sophie Walsh built something that lasted. They took what they were given and made it matter. Emma felt her throat tighten, tears threatening again. These complicated tears of grief and gratitude and hope, all tangled together. That is exactly right, baby. That is exactly what we are doing. They sat together in the warmth, sipping hot chocolate and watching the fire. And Emma let herself feel the full weight of everything they had and built and become. 5 years ago, she had been living in a car, convinced she had failed as a mother, certain she would never climb back out of the hole her siblings had dug for her. Thomas had thrown her a lifeline, and she had been brave enough to grab it, had used it not just to save herself, but to build something that would save others. The foundation would continue long after she was gone. The tiny homes would shelter generations of mothers and children. The legal aid program would protect thousands from the kind of abuse she had endured. The job training would give people skills that turned into careers that turned into stability. And all of it traced back to one quiet man in the woods who had seen something worth protecting in a woman the world had overlooked, who had planned his gift with such care that even her siblings' greed could not overcome it. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like breathing, the forest alive in ways cities never were. Snow would come soon, real snow that would blanket the clearing and make the cabin look like something from a Christmas card. They would spend winter here warm and safe, while mothers in crisis called the hotline and found people willing to help. Spring would bring new life, calves born in the valley, birds returning from migration, women graduating from job training programs and moving into permanent housing. Summer would see the garden producing vegetables, children playing in the clearing, ceremonies celebrating victories large and small. The years would roll forward, carrying Emma and Sophie and James with them, building on what Thomas had started until his gift had touched so many lives. The original act of generosity would be almost lost in the ripples spreading outward. But here, tonight, in this cabin built by hand decades ago by a man who decided that character mattered more than blood, they were proof that sometimes, rarely, impossibly, the right gift given to the right person at the right time could change everything. Sophie fell asleep first, her head on Emma's shoulder, her hot chocolate mug empty and forgotten on the table. Emma and James sat quietly, not wanting to disturb her, watching the fire burn down to coals that glowed red and gold in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring more work, more mothers who needed help, more children who deserved stability. Tomorrow the foundation would open its doors and continue what Thomas had started when he decided one broken homeless mother deserved a second chance. But tonight they were just a family, chosen rather than born into, bound by love rather than obligation. Proof that the life you never thought you would be allowed to have could become real if you were brave enough and someone believed in you enough. They had built this together. Emma's determination and Sophie's courage and Thomas's careful planning and the community's support all woven into something stronger than any single thread. Emma looked down at her sleeping daughter and felt something settle deep in her chest, solid and unshakable. They had made it. They had survived the war and built something beautiful from the wreckage. They had proven that Thomas's faith was not misplaced, that character could triumph over circumstance, that hope was not foolish even when everything logical said otherwise. The fire crackled softly, sending up a shower of sparks that disappeared up the chimney into the Montana night. In the morning they would wake to mountains and possibilities, to work that mattered and a home that was permanent, to proof that sometimes when you refuse to give up and someone gives you the tools to fight back, you can build the life you deserve. Not the life you were handed, but the one you earned by surviving and helping others survive too. That was Thomas's legacy. That was their gift forward. That was what it meant to understand that blood does not make family, that character does. And standing there in the cabin he had built with his own hands, surrounded by evidence of lives changed and futures secured, Emma Walsh finally understood what Thomas Bennett had known all along. That the truest measure of wealth was not what you accumulated, but what you gave away. That the strongest families were built from choice rather than genetics. That the best revenge against a world that tried to break you was simply refusing to break, and then using your survival to help others survive too. That legacy was not about being remembered, but about making sure the people who came after you had it better than you did. Thomas had watched her from a distance and decided she possessed those qualities, had tested her without her knowledge and found her worthy, had built protection around her from beyond the grave because he believed she would use his gift the way he intended. And she had. God help her, she had done exactly that, had taken his $265 million and turned it into hope for people who had run out of hope, had built sanctuary for people who needed sanctuary, had proven that sometimes one person's faith in another person's character could change the world. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human drama but beautiful in their constancy. The mountains stood watch as they had for millennia, patient witnesses to everything that rose and fell and rose again. And in a cabin in the Montana wilderness, three people who had found each other across distance and circumstance, in the ruins of families that should have protected them, sat together in the warmth, bound not by blood, but by something stronger, something that would outlast them all. Character. The thing Thomas had spent his life understanding and Emma had spent hers proving. The thing that mattered more than money or status or anything else the world tried to sell you. The thing that could not be bought or inherited, but only earned through 1,000 small choices. To be kind when cruelty was easier. To give when taking was simpler. To stand firm when surrender beckoned. Emma carried Sophie upstairs to bed, tucked her under quilts that smelled of pine and home, and stood in the doorway for a long moment watching her daughter sleep. Tomorrow would bring its challenges and its truths and its opportunities to prove again that Thomas had chosen well. But tonight she was just grateful, deeply and completely grateful, for a man she had barely known who had seen her clearly enough to save her, for a daughter brave enough to defend her mother in front of a judge, for a community that had closed ranks around strangers, because that was what you did for people who mattered. She went back downstairs where James was banking the fire for the night, moving around the cabin with the familiarity of someone who belonged there, who had earned his place through steady presence and patient care and the kind of love that did not demand but simply gave. He looked up when she entered and smiled, and Emma smiled back. And no words were necessary because they understood each other in the way people do when they have built something together from broken pieces and stubborn hope. The last thing Emma did before bed was pull out Thomas's letter and read it one more time by lamplight, his precise handwriting spelling out words that had sustained her through the darkest days. Stand firm. You deserve this. Do not let them take what I meant for you. She had stood firm and she had won, and Thomas had been right about everything, had seen her character from a distance and decided it was worth more than all the gold in the world. Thank you. She whispered the words to his memory, to the mountains, to the universe that had somehow conspired to put her in the right place at the right time to receive a gift she had not known she needed. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for giving us a chance to prove you right. I will not waste this. I promise you that. And she had not wasted it. 847 families would attest to that. Thousands more in the years to come. A legacy that would outlive them all, rippling forward through time like stones thrown into still water, creating waves that would touch shores Thomas could never have imagined. That was immortality, real immortality, not in being remembered, but in making sure your values survived you, in building something so solid that it could weather any storm and shelter anyone who needed shelter. Thomas Bennett had done that, and Emma Walsh, once homeless and broken and certain she would never amount to anything, had proven herself worthy of carrying it forward. That was the real gift, not the money but the validation, the certainty that came from someone seeing you and deciding you mattered. And that gift, unlike money, could never be spent or stolen or divided among greedy siblings. It was hers forever, proof that character triumphed in the end, that good people could win sometimes, that the universe occasionally would balance its scales in favor of those who refused to compromise their integrity, even when compromise would have been easier. She climbed the stairs to bed, to the room she shared with James in the cabin Thomas had built, and looked out the window one last time at mountains standing eternal under stars that had witnessed everything and judged nothing. Tomorrow would come with its demands and its opportunities, but tonight she was simply grateful to be here, in this place, with these people, building this legacy. And somewhere in the bedrock beneath her feet, in a vault that had held secrets worth $265 million, Thomas Bennett's empty collection space waited to be filled again, not with art or stocks or ancient coins, but with something far more valuable. Stories of lives changed and futures secured, of mothers who found safety and children who found stability, of a legacy that proved beyond doubt that character mattered more than blood, and that sometimes the best family was the one you chose to build from love and respect, and the shared determination to make the world a little bit better than you found it. That was Thomas's final gift. Not wealth, but purpose. Not security, but meaning. Not an ending, but a beginning that would echo through generations, proving that one person's faith in another person's character could change everything, could save lives, could build something that truly lasted. And as Emma drifted off to sleep in the cabin Thomas had built with his own hands, she knew with absolute certainty that he would be proud. Not of the money or the foundation or the 847 families helped, but of the fact that she had stayed true to herself, had maintained her integrity under pressure, had given without keeping score, had proven that his faith in her character was not misplaced. That was the legacy that mattered. That was the gift that endured. That was what it meant to build something that outlasted you, to remain a giver in a world of takers, to maintain integrity in a time of greed. Thomas Bennett had known it. Emma Walsh had proven it, and generations yet unborn would benefit from it, carrying forward the simple truth that character was not inherited, but chosen, not given, but earned, not about who you were born to be, but who you decided to become. The mountains stood watch. The stars wheeled overhead. And in a cabin in Montana, a family slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they had honored a gift given in faith and had built something worthy of the man who believed in them when no one else did. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.